of hearings on submissions on the proposed Napier City District Plan. Today is focusing on the topics of historic heritage and notable trees, primarily historic heritage. The panel you have before you today comprises myself, Robert Schofield, the chair, who will be the common denominator throughout all the hearings. To my right is Commissioner Brosnan, and to my left is Commissioner Van Veldhuizen and Commissioner Taylor. So welcome, thank you. And we have council officers on our right who I shall ask to introduce themselves to the hearing. And we have some submitters ready to go for a bit later. First up today, we will hear from the reporting officers on the topics. They've provided summary statements which have been pre-circulated, part of which was devoted to answering some preliminary questions that the panel had on reading the Section 42A reports and the submissions. I will underline the fact that we have read all the pre-circulated information before us. One thing we haven't done is do, as a group, site visits. So that is definitely on our radar to do, particularly for someone who doesn't live in Napier. I'm very familiar with Napier, but I don't live here, so I will look forward to a few good site visits with the panel here. So we have mostly in-person attendances today, which is great. Always good to see. We don't all have to rely on that. And a few presentations as well, so thank you for that. In terms of housekeeping, the only thing I will emphasise is emergencies. So if there is a fire, there will be sirens and bells and whistles and lights. So please go through the door, the front foyer, follow staff and go out to the forecourt there underneath the big tree, the Norfolk pine. If it's an earthquake, do the usual. If it's a big one, a long one, we will go up the steps next door to the Scenic Hotel on the north side and climb up as high as we can and as fast as we can. And that's about it, really. So I will ask submitters to come forward. We've brought that table as close as we can so we're not peering at you in a dim, distant situation. So please do come up when I can give the nod. You're welcome. And so first of all, could the reporting officers, council officers, please introduce themselves to the hearing? That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Morena, everyone. My name is Paulina Wilhelm. I'm the manager of city development for Napier City Council.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Fleur Lincoln. I'm the principal policy planner here at Napier City Council.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anne Galloway. I'm involved as the one of the heritage consultants.
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Pashif, and I'm one of the heritage consultants.
Morena, my name is Brooke Hemmings, and I'm a graduate policy planner at Napier City Council.
And we have a whole bunch, a small group of other council support staff there, so thank you for that. So without any further ado, I don't think there's any procedural matters to raise at this point in time. We'll turn to the reporting officers just to talk to the summary statements and to answer any questions the panel have. So, thank you.
Good morning. As I said, my name is Fleur Lincoln, and I'm employed as the principal policy planner within Napier City Council's city development team. I was previously employed at the council as a heritage planner, and although I have a new role, I have retained this portfolio for the council. My qualifications include a Bachelor of Resource and Environmental Planning with honours. I'm an intermediate member of the NZPI and have completed the Making Good Decisions program. I have 22 years' experience working as a planner in private consultancy and local government. And I've been involved in the review of the proposed district plan since 2019. I was involved in all aspects of the review of the historic heritage-related chapters of the district plan, including the preparation of the draft and proposed district plan chapters, the Section 32A report, and prepared the Section 42A report for the matters relating to all historic heritage-related chapters. With me today, I have Elizabeth Pashif and Anne Galloway. Elizabeth has had her own heritage consultancy business for the past 10 years and has 35 years' experience working in the heritage field. Elizabeth holds a PhD in Heritage and Museum Studies, among many other related qualifications. Anne has been the principal architect at Anne Galloway Architects Limited for the past 10 years and is a fellow of the New Zealand Institute of Architects and a qualified and registered architect with experience in heritage matters. Anne is also a life member of the Art Deco Trust and has served 10 years as heritage representative on the Art Deco Trust board. Further information on their qualifications and experience can be found in the supplementary evidence attached as Appendix C of my recommendation report. Together with conservation architect Chris Cochrane, Elizabeth prepared the technical recommendation report for the historic heritage items and groups, and with Anne and Elizabeth prepared the technical recommendations reports for the historic heritage areas. Anne also prepared the Art Deco signage guidelines. The supplementary evidence prepared following submissions being received was also prepared by Elizabeth and Anne. And both Elizabeth and Anne are here today in order to provide responses to any questions the panel may have in relation to technical heritage matters within their area of expertise or on the work undertaken to date. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at the end of my statement. So I'd just like to provide a little bit of an overview of the heritage topic. It's quite a comprehensive one in the district plan. The protection of historic heritage from inappropriate subdivision use and development is a matter of national importance under Section 6F of the RMA. And I am aware that the Coalition Government is in the process of preparing national direction for built heritage. However, few details have yet been released. The historic heritage related chapters are divided into those that protect and manage effects of use and development on individually listed historic heritage items and groups of items, and those that protect and manage the effects on heritage areas. The individual heritage items and groups are managed through the Historic Heritage Chapter, Schedule 3, definitions, and the planning maps. Historic heritage areas are classified as either precincts or overlays, with each being managed within their own chapter alongside definitions, Schedule 4, Appendix 17, and the planning maps. Although Council has chosen not to manage archaeology through a set of rules, a list of the sites currently recorded within Napier's boundary is provided for in Schedule 5 and on the planning maps. Napier also has archaeological alert overlays in its GIS, its mapping system, that sits outside of the district plan. As previously noted, Council engaged heritage experts in reviewing the existing historic heritage items list. This involved a review of the existing list in the operative plan, as well as additional research, assessment, and recommendations on potential new items. At this time, historic heritage groups were introduced, where two or more individual items held some commonality with the others, and additional heritage values existed as a collective. This work resulted in 28 additional items or groups included in the proposed plan. Our heritage experts were also engaged to review the various types of heritage areas in the operative plan and to make recommendations on new areas alongside recommendations on the management approach. This resulted in a number of changes to existing areas as well as new areas being introduced. Following the receipt of submissions and further submissions, Elizabeth and Anne were engaged to provide their technical recommendations on a number of matters raised in these submissions, including the inclusion of heritage items and groups, heritage areas, and the management approach. Their findings and recommendations are provided for in Appendix C of my report, and I've incorporated these into my recommendation report. There were 46 submissions received, raising 363 submission points in relation to historic heritage chapters, and this includes points made on relevant sections such as definitions, the schedules, and planning maps. There were 88 further submission points also received. As this topic involved multiple chapters, I divided my recommendation report into these chapters with the definitions and the schedules and plan matters that related to each of those contained within that section of the report for that chapter. I'd like to summarise some of the key matters below. So Schedule 3, which is where it's actually our schedule of those items and groups. So there were a number of submitters who sought to have their property removed from that schedule. And these include the following properties: the main block at Napier Girls High School, which is reference 34, 2 Milton Terrace, reference 185, 24 Harding Road, reference 107, Seaview Terrace Houses Group, reference 198, the Waiapu Cathedral, reference 12, Ormond Chapel, reference 17, Petane Grange, reference 100, the Carnell Street Houses Group, reference 15, and La Grande Mason and Observatory Base, reference 20. Heritage New Zealand also sought to include an additional 5 items into the schedule, and my recommendations on these were informed by the supplementary findings and recommendations from heritage experts, which are included in my report. There was also some key changes sought included in relation to the addition of provisions that enabled minor exterior alterations and attachments such as solar panels and customer service connections without the need for resource consent, as well as the ability to undertake maintenance and minor upgrades or to place new network utilities on or within heritage items with a more permissive approach. Changes were also sought to the definitions for alterations and additions, and my recommendations on these are in my report, and I've included a number of changes relating to this topic. There were also changes sought in relation to new provisions to manage new accessory buildings within the same site of heritage items or groups. And as a result, I made a number of recommendations for changes to better manage the effect of those accessory buildings on those sites. There were also a number of submitters who sought changes to the approach to demolition, including the definition of total and partial demolition and a more permissive approach, whilst others sought a more restrictive approach. In my Section 42A report, I recommended to make changes to the definitions, but to retain a restrictive approach to demolition. I also note that I recommend further changes to Policy 7, which provides policy direction for demolition and relocation following the receipt of submitted evidence. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. For the Napier City Heritage Precinct, there were submissions on this chapter primarily related to the extent, and I've recommended to reduce the extent of that precinct. And finally, historic heritage overlays and precincts, and there are a number of commonalities across key matters raised by submissions within these areas. These included a more permissive approach for those minor alterations and additions, correcting a number of errors made within the notified text, and a large number of submissions were received in relation to the extent of the Napier South Historic Heritage Overlay, with a clear desire to extend the extent to include a number of other Napier South streets. Concerns were also raised in relation to how the plan will manage the interface between heritage areas and higher density residential areas that adjoin them. And I've recommended to introduce new provisions to enable minor exterior alterations and attachments and a more permissive approach to network utilities. I've also recommended an extension to the Napier South Historic Heritage Overlay. There was a procedural matter relating to a late submission where whilst I was preparing the recommendation report, I discovered that the address and legal description for the observatory base, which is reference 20, was incorrectly referenced in Schedule 3. The observatory base was recorded as being located on 198 Church Road. However, this property was since subdivided and the site containing the observatory base was sold to Emerald Hills Joint Venture Limited. So this was, as a result, there was no direct correspondence with the new owners in relation to the item being on Schedule 3. And so I invited the Emerald Hills Joint Venture to make a late further submission, which was received on the 8th of October. Emerald Hills Joint Venture supported the submission of Marist Holdings Limited, which sought to delete the observatory base from Schedule 3, and my recommendation on this has been included as an addendum to my Section 42A report and uploaded to the Council's hearings portal webpage. So in response to the pre-circulated submitters' evidence, so there was a number of evidence and statements that were received from submitters, and I've read this evidence and am prepared to respond to any questions or matters raised in relation to the information provided. I believe that in some cases there is some scope to make changes to address the concerns raised. I'd be happy to address these at a convenient time to the panel. The key matters where further consideration has resulted in a change to my recommended approach in my 42A report are the following: the extent of the West Quay waterfront precinct, the separation of activities provided for in Rule 1 of the Historic Heritage chapter, the activity status in the Iron Pot Historic Heritage Area, which is OVR 8, Rule R6, and the consequent changes to support this change. And I've prepared some alternative wording for consideration, which I'm happy to circulate at the time convenient to the panel. The matter of discretion 6 in the Iron Pot overlay, which is OVR 8 R9B, fencing requirements in the Napier South Heritage Area, and Policy 7 in the Historic Heritage chapter, which is the policy direction for demolition. I've prepared alternative wording for consideration if the panel were of a mind to consider this change to this recommendation. In addition, our experts and I have discussed options for addressing other concerns raised by submitters and are prepared to speak to these. A number of matters were raised by the panel in advance of the hearing, and I've provided these as separate answers and responses, and they've been uploaded onto the portal. So in summary, I consider that the key matters of contention relate to the inclusion of historic heritage items and groups in Schedule 3 that have been requested through submissions to be removed, a lack of consenting pathway for total or partial demolition of Group A heritage items, particularly where they are impacted by earthquake-prone requirements, and the extension of the Napier South Historic Heritage Overlay. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Just in terms of your recommended amendments to Policy 7 and other things, I think it would be good to have a copy of that available as soon as possible.
Yes, I have copies available.
Okay, thank you. And before I turn to the, well, we'll ask you any questions before we turn to notable trees. Okay, cool, while we're all hot on it. Can you just as a broad level question, two broad questions, the difference between an overlay and a precinct in regard to managing historic heritage values? Sure.
So the overlays are related to an area where the chapter exists purely for the purpose of protecting historic heritage, whilst the precincts include other provisions. So, for example, the West Quay Waterfront Precinct includes primarily provisions relating to protecting heritage values, but also includes more kind of place-based provisions which sit outside of the heritage matters.
Okay, thank you. And also the differences in the categorisations of historic heritage items, just a sort of quick overview.
Sure. Okay, so within the heritage items or groups, we have Group A and Group B. And the Group A is items that are outstanding in their heritage values and typically outstanding in terms of the, I guess, the streetscape values as well as interior values. And so that has informed the way that we manage those.
Is it
items.
interior values always part of that?
Not always. So there are some items within the city centre which are Group A, but the interior is not necessarily entirely intact, but do still hold value. But the value for those city centre ones is the streetscape values, whilst then you have the individual items, and typically that's outstanding and have the interior values as well.
Right, thank you. And category B?
Yeah, so they are also obviously significant, but of a less significant scale.
And no interiors involved? Category B?
No, so we've opted not to protect the interiors of category B.
And now there's another sort of category
Yes.
involved? What can you
Yes,
explain that one?
so that was as a result of a submission received on Milton Terrace, and the new category was historic place. And essentially the difference in heritage values was that they were more ephemeral in nature, and also recognised the significant changes that had been made to that building.
Right.
So it was both ephemeral in nature and those significant changes.
Okay, thank you. I have a few further questions, but I'll turn to the panel first for questions.
No, not at this stage.
Commissioner Brosnan, or shall I sit on? What do you think?
I'll reserve.
Okay,
Thank you.
cool. So there's a number. So you've pressed pause on a number of submitters' relief sought to wait to hear from them today, basically. Is there any pre-circulated evidence that has made you sort of alter your views or opinions?
Yes, there is.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so the evidence that was raised through the Waiapu Cathedral
Yep.
and the recommendations that I made to Historic Heritage Policy 7, which was the policy direction around demolition and or relocation.
Oh, yep.
I had recommended some changes to that in response to a Heritage New Zealand submission on that matter, and that essentially closed off any avenue for, I guess, a consenting pathway for demolition for that Category A. I realise now that my intent was to provide, I guess, more certainty and less subjective nature in that, but as a result, there are very few instances where there is a consenting pathway for that, given it is a non-compliant activity. And so as a result, I have recommended to make changes to that, my recommendation for that policy, which I've circulated, which provides the consenting pathway for certain circumstances where demolition or relocation may be appropriate.
And you've also changed the activity status to...
No.
That was...
That was a different
recommendation.
matter. Yeah, so I consider that it's still appropriate to have it as a non-compliant activity,
Right.
which is, in my opinion, to be used for, exceptional circumstances, and provide that gateway test. So, yeah, consistent with the approach that we're taking.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other...
Yes, there is. Yes, sorry. Okay, I've also circulated some changes to overlay 8, which is the iron plot area. There was a submission sought to change the activity status for demolition relocation from non-compliant to discretionary. And I have made a change to that in my marked up copy of the plan. But obviously changing it from non-compliant to discretionary requires some changes to the policy framework to support that. And so I've made some recommendations there around the policy and also assessment criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Marist Holdings. In relation to Historic Heritage Rule 1, there was a submission asking to separate out the two activities within that rule because it didn't quite make sense, and I agree with them. So there'd be no conditions applied to the rule governing internal alterations within that rule.
So this is OVR 8.
No, this is the Historic Heritage chapter. So this is the Marist Holdings. Sorry, I've moved on to the next one.
Okay, so that the
That's, no, there's not. It's simply a Rule 1. There's two activities within Rule 1 of Historic Heritage chapter. And my recommendation is to separate out those two into two separate rules.
Okay.
No major change in terms of the intent of those, just
Sort of
for clarity.
formatting kind of.
It's a formatting matter, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's also some potential to make changes to the fencing standard for the Napier South Historic Heritage Overlay. I've sought advice from our heritage experts, and they've provided some guidance on that. So I haven't drafted a standard as yet, but I have some ideas and I'd be happy to provide
Okay.
that commentary following the submission. Submitter speaking.
So we'll probably add that to the list of matters for reply.
Yes.
Thank you.
And finally, I've circulated some maps that show the designation for KiwiRail, which shows that the designation does cover the corner of a privately owned building, which the submitter is saying that they own, but from our records, I don't think they do. But then it also shows that we need to make some adjustments to the extent of the West Quay waterfront precinct to exclude the designation from that precinct.
Could you just for the record, just clarify what these two diagrams are showing?
Sure. Okay, so the one on the left shows the property boundary. Oh, sorry. Didn't realise. Okay, so the one on the top is showing the property boundary, and obviously it's an aerial, so it shows the location of the buildings and the railway line.
So the property boundary is blue?
Blue, correct. The aerial below that shows in blue the extent of the railway designation. And you can see it cuts across the corner of that building and their land. And you can see in the pink hashed line, that's the extent of the West Quay waterfront precinct. And the intent was to exclude the designation from that precinct. However, the designation requires some adjustment to exclude the privately owned land from that. So they will have, once that correction is made, they will align.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any questions? I won't ask you to go through the recommended changes in response to questions from the panel. Just one quick question, though, in respect to assessment criteria 6D, on page 5 of your changes, is the second half of that says, including loss of life in the event of significant natural hazard and safety alterations or other changes. Kind of doesn't quite flow as a sentence.
Sorry, can you repeat where I...
So on page 5, AC
Yes,
6D,
yes.
after including loss of life, it says in the event of significant natural hazard and safety alterations.
In the event.
Just needs like natural hazard event or something.
Oh,
Just to
okay, sure.
complete it. That's all.
Yep, some minor correction on that one.
That's right. And you refer to key properties decision, which I think is which is now a hotel. Could you provide a copy of that
Yes,
decision?
absolutely.
Because it could be
Yes, I can
quite
provide that.
helpful. Thank
Yep.
you. That's all my questions. Any questions from the panel?
No, I'll just wait for the reply report.
Okay. Yes, similarly. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll look at notable trees now. Ms. Hemmings.
So, morning everyone. As I said before, my name is Brooke Hemmings and I'm the Graduate Policy Planner within Napier City Council City Development Team. Now I've been involved in the district plan process since January of this year. My qualifications include a Bachelor of Social Science. And whilst I prepared the Section 42A report for the matters relating to notable trees, I was not involved in the drafting of the proposed district plan chapter or the Section 32 report in relation to this. The purpose of the notable trees chapter is to provide for the identification, protection of trees within Napier that are of significance for their social, historical, cultural, botanical, amenity and or landmark values. Such trees are assessed using the Standard Tree Evaluation Method, otherwise known as STEM, by a qualified arborist. In total, there were 8 submissions, raising 15 submission points in relation to notable trees and 8 further submission points, as well as 1 submission and 1 further submission in relation to Schedule 1 of notable trees, which outlines the notable trees within Napier. Sorry, I got that wrong there, 16 submission points. Among the 16 submission points, there were 5 points in opposition, 8 seeking amendments, and 3 supports. When collating the submissions on the chapter, 5 key themes were apparent. These were network utilities, the protection of private trees, biodiversity, reference to the Citywide Reserve Management Plan, and then just general support. The key submitters within this chapter were Chorus New Zealand, Kiwi Rail, Powerco, Heritage New Zealand, Forest and Bird, and Napier City Council, our Parks and Reserves team. In response to the submissions received, I've recommended a few minor amendments to the chapter. However, there has been some pre-circulated submitter evidence in which I have read from a number of submitters, and I'm prepared to respond to any questions or matters raised within the relation of the information provided in the evidence. I believe that in some cases there is some scope to make changes to address these concerns. Such concerns in particular were about the operation of network utilities within the drip line of notable trees. In particular, these were from telecommunication companies and Powerco. Upon consideration of this evidence, I am prepared to make a change to my original approach and make the notable trees chapter more accommodating towards network utility operation within the drip line. I have prepared some amendments as well as some new rules and standards in which I'm happy to circulate to the panel.
Please do.
There are a few questions raised by the panel which I'm sure they've seen my answers. However, the first question about earthworks in the drip line, there may be some slight changes to that due to the evidence, due to my changes in relation to the evidence. Just circulate through. Otherwise, based on the matters raised in the submissions, the only matters that I deemed contentious were the protection of private trees and the network utilities and the drip line of notable trees. Otherwise, the majority of submissions concerned to seek the protection of private trees as well as the consideration of network utilities. It is important to note, though, that the purpose of notable trees is to protect trees due to their historical, cultural, botanical, amenity, and/or landmark values. So, today.
Thank you.
And
Yep.
that's right.
And if you could circulate that. I think the only question while you're doing that is in terms of the standards for earthworks and drip lines, why provide it just for network utilities? Why wouldn't they provide for all other activities that may affect the drip line in terms of as a standard for across the board? Or maybe I should wait to see your changes first before commenting.
Yeah, if that's okay.
Okay. So you're not proposing changes to standard 2 for trees?
No, not that
Let me just have a look.
I'm aware of within this. Sorry,
Sorry.
just brought it up. We've-
No, yeah.
Yeah, we've recommended the new standard 2.
New
Yeah.
standard 2.
For earthworks within the drip line.
So that accords with what the telecommunication companies were seeking?
Yes, in particular Powerco.
You're right.
The chapter as notified doesn't include any standards,
No,
so, yeah.
see that. But they will do.
Yes,
That's the
that's what the
recommendation.
recommendation
Put some
is.
standards. So I suppose my question still stands is that standards around doing earthworks around the drip line of notable trees, should they just relate to network utility operators or just be generic to all activities that might affect notable trees?
Can I come back on that one? and
Okay.
Reply?
Yeah, okay, I'll put that down as a question. Okay, any questions?
Thank you. Just reading through the proposed amendments to R2A. It looks like it could be reasonably permissive, and I wonder if that's the intent. So the tree is either dead or has fallen, or has a fatal disease, or has the potential to create serious and imminent threat to the health and safety of people or property. And the or property bit feels like, I'm interested in your view on how the potential to create a threat to property is not too broad.
Not too broad. I mean, I guess there could be scope to bring that in a little bit. However, putting in the effects to property would just be if the tree was posing a threat to the health and safety of that property. You wouldn't. Sorry, give me.
Yeah, because when added to a permitted activity status, it becomes very permissive. Is that the intent?
Is the intent so then network utility? Oh, sorry. Fleur, do you mind helping
You want
with
me
that
to
one?
help?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
Sure. Yeah, so the intent was to broaden it, to make it include the property as well as people. That's certainly a request that's come through from Network Utilities. And in considering, what the right approach was, we did review a number of district plans with similar provisions, and they included property as well. I do, I think it's also, it's a tricky one because it's quite a subjective condition. And we did think long and hard about whether that was appropriate, because our conditions, we try to make them very black and white, very clear. But as I said, it was tend to be a consistent approach across the country. But I do, concede that it does potentially open it up to more.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, is the intention, you've spoken, your reasoning for that to be specifically around network operations, but it's all network utility operators. However, this is not a section that's under Tree R5, which is where you have your specific network utility operations. So this is just your general permitted activity rule, is that correct? So it could be interpreted by any member of the public for any notable tree. Not specific to network utility operators.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And the recommended changes are quite extensive. What's the provenance of them? Where have they derived from? Were they wording sought by submitters, or have you trolled through other district plans and cobbled them together? What's the provenance?
Throughout district plans.
Can't hear you, sorry.
Throughout other district plans.
Which ones?
We looked.
Do
Well,
you have those copies?
I do. Sorry.
I do recall we looked at Auckland,
Auckland.
Unitary Council, Wellington,
And there's one.
Dunedin, and there's appeared to be quite a consistent approach across a number of plans across the country. Obviously, the changes were within the scope of changes sought through submissions, but they weren't specific in terms of the wording requested.
Yeah. And in terms of the changes that have been tabled today, have they been shared in advance with the submitters who raised those issues?
No.
No. So when is the intent to do that?
When the submitters come in today, if they are here. Yep.
Right,
Yeah.
No.
okay.
So telecommunication companies are presenting today,
Yeah,
and we wanted to table that information in advance so that you're aware that we've reconsidered our approach.
yeah. Can you email it to the telecommunications company? Because obviously we want to have their response to the
Sure.
quite extensive changes, and it's better if they've seen that before they turn up.
That would include Powerco as well?
Yeah, well, anybody who's
Because we're not
submitted on the
appearing
issue.
Yep,
Yeah.
we can do that.
In terms of the issue raised by Commissioner Brosnan, obviously notable trees can be quite large, and at times they fall over and branches fall off and cause damage to property. I'm aware of cases. I've sat on a hearing in Wanganui where that was an issue, and we enabled the removal of the tree because it was in danger of falling over and crushing a house. So does Napier City Council undertake surveys of the notable trees to assess the state of them and whether or not they're posing a risk to the health and safety of people and properties?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so our Parks and Reserves team actively manage the notable trees. As you're aware, they're only on council-owned property,
Right.
and so part of that asset management is to engage an arborist to do those regular reviews.
Right. So in terms of potential damage to property, does that extend to property other than council-owned property in terms of where these trees are located?
Yes.
So there's potential for the trees, even though they're located on council property, to fall over and crush a private residents, for example.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Great, thanks.
Okay, and just a follow-up question there. So the rule framework is predicated on the fact that these are council-owned trees. Is that correct? The rules might be different if they were applied to private property, for instance. Okay, I understand. And so through the draft plan process, did any, and I know this has happened, people volunteer trees or suggest trees for being inclusion?
I'm happy to take this one, because I was
Okay.
involved in the stuff from the start of it.
Right.
We did have a number of people questioning why it didn't extend to privately owned trees. We didn't have any serious submissions. People did say, oh, what about that tree on such and such a hill? But nothing in terms of, that you would consider to be an application to submit a tree.
Right. Thank you. Any questions?
Fine,
No?
it's covered.
Okay. Thank you. No more questions. I'm just sort of keeping an eye on the time frame.
Perfectly on time.
We have our first submitter today, Mr. Buck. You care to join us at the table, as they say? So we have your submission in front of us, so thank you very much for that. Just go back to it. And I might just bring up the property on my Google Maps, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Thank you.
It's push. Push to activate.
It should already be on.
It's on.
Yeah, they're all
Quite
on.
quiet back there.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I think the
apologies.
sound could be up for the people sitting there. I mean, we only got about 50% of all that.
Okay. We'll try and remember to speak right into the microphone like that. Thank you.
So would you like me to go, Mr. Chairman? And
Yes, please. The
Start.
floor is yours. Yes.
thanks. I've got a further submission, which I'll read if I may. And it starts as follows. The review of our property in Ahuriri, and I should say it's jointly owned by my wife and myself, and she apologises for not being here, but she's at a board meeting, which the date was for which was set before this one. It's a prime example of how to get offside with ratepayers. Someone from Heritage New Zealand dedicated to the premise that mere mortals cannot be trusted to responsibly own capital assets that they pay for, that they being the property us. Not Heritage New Zealand writes a report recommending restrictive covenants to be placed on a property some 150 years after it was built without having the common courtesy to interview the owners. My wife and I, as to its physical state, whether or not it's been modified, if we have long-term plans for it, what, if any, adjoining property we might own, and then blithely recommend that if we ever want any modifications, we have to apply to go through hearings at our cost. And I find that in the spirit of private property rights somewhat offensive. We've had this happen before. We went to hearings with the Hastings District Council, and Heritage New Zealand never bothered to show up. So you can understand my cynicism. And in this case, the officer's report on our submission ignores the criticisms we made of council, presumably because they're valid. Napier City Council should not allow itself to be put in the position of being policemen where it is not necessary. It has its own building codes and planning requirements already in place. So if we were to want to modify our property in any respect, we've got to apply to council, who can then treat it as an individual application. As central government is proposing a comprehensive review of the Resource Management Act, an objective is to minimise local bureaucracy inhibiting reasonable redevelopment. Surely councillors, as the ratepayer representatives, should have the right, coupled with fair consultation, to ensure this proposed plan complies with what will be the modern legislation, leaving the imposition of further rules on long-suffering ratepayers until that review is completed. Heritage protectors expect those same ratepayers to pay the bills, which I submit is very unfair and a further reason to mistrust both they and local government. Local government goes on and on about people not participating in its roles, and this is all prime example as to why. Ahuriri is a mishmash of architectural styles, and it also has an area where the port can have a say in what people can do with their properties. Our particular one is 4 doors outside that, but nonetheless it applies. It applies to the area. We also own the property at the rear, double the width with frontage on Waghorn Street. And the reason we own that is that when we bought the one in the front to house our son and our first grandchild, was that the vendor of the rear of the Waghorn Street property and the Harding Road property was the same person, and they were represented by. He'd moved to Australia to a place called Clifton Beach, which is just north of Cairns, and we happened to own a property one beach up the road, Palm Cove, and so we went and saw him. And he said, "Oh, well, if you're buying the front one, you can have the back one, just for a bit extra." And so that's how we did that deal. It wasn't that we were, it was a package. We also, and frankly, if the council's planning department and Heritage New Zealand had bothered to talk to us first, I would not be appearing in front of you today. We could have negotiated our way through this. We would have told them what we owned, what modifications had been made prior to our purchase 22 years ago and since, and that the benefit is because they're both let with long-term tenants, and obviously we've had to modify them so that they comply with the current tenancies legislation. And that the beneficiaries of the trust that own it are our 3 sons who all work in and are directors and owners of our family business in Hawke's Bay. We're not property developers, we are residents of proven probity. And I resent the fact that we get treated as though we're not. And find it galling to have policy wonks with no skin in the game telling us how they would like us to behave, should we as the council ever want to change anything. Their raison d'etre is about the negative, and I think Napier should want it to be about the positive. I really, you can understand, I'm annoyed and I feel I've been very discourteously treated because nobody can even do the common courtesy. I was told by somebody in council that they didn't know how to communicate with me. I thought, well, how do you send the rate bills? So, you know, I suspect because of what central government are doing with resource management, you as a committee should leave yourself some option at the end of all this process to make sure that this proposed district plan complies with what might be the law in a matter of months' time. I understand the first draft of that is due out late this month or early next month. And there's not much point in writing a set of laws of policies now that don't comply. So you should have an umbrella clause in whatever you're drafting that gives you the right, this committee, not these people, to fit with what is the modern law. Because if you take on central government, you know, wouldn't be, we know who'll win. Okay, that's me. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? I have.
Sure.
Mr. Buck,
I've been
the,
quite critical. I mean, I
That's-
thought it would prompt something.
I got a question for you. So the property facing on Waghorn Street, is that number 58 that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's right. It is double the width.
Yeah.
And it's got a long-term tenant in it. He's been there for 20-odd years. It's within walking distance of the Union Hotel. I think that's why he likes it.
Okay. And since you purchased 24, what alterations have you undertaken to it? You mentioned bringing it up to compliance with the rental standards.
Oh, well, things to do with insulation, painted it, heated it. In fact, just recently we've installed a new heating system. All those things that are just part of the current legislation.
Sure. Any exterior alterations as part of that?
Not on the facade. There's nothing much else to it. I mean, the rest of it's quite plain. And frankly, it was built as the Heritage Report says, 1850s, 1860s. It's timber, presumably untreated timber in those days, in a salt-laden environment. So it's deteriorating of its own accord. You've also got to think of what it's going to be like in another 100 years. We painted it 12 years ago,
Right.
and we're going to have to do it again because of the salt. And we've had windows fall out of it and all sorts of things which we've had to replace and have replaced. But I can't see it would be nice to keep the facade, but if we were to ever, if we or our successors, I mean, I'm in my 80s, so I'm not going to be here in another 20 years' time. But if our successors, our children or whoever, were to decide to develop on that site, they would come in from Waghorn Street, where you've got double the width and obviously can provide off-road vehicle parking and do the two.
Yeah.
But none of that's been taken into account.
All right. Thank you for that. That's all.
No, you've answered my questions. Commissioner Brosnan.
Thank you very much, John, for your information and your submission. Do you believe the property has heritage value? The facade in particular you mentioned?
Oh, the person that did all our architecture personally, the wineries and our home and all that sort of thing, finished up because of his criticisms on Heritage New Zealand. When we bought our Hariri, he had a look at it and he said the facade's quite nice, but you've got to face the reality that it's not going to last forever. You can't just go on reinstating it. We think the facade's very, very nice, but if you've got to do everything else, or he made the point, should the council ever come to you and say, we want to upgrade all the services around there, because they're old too, you know, and what if they've got to redo the sewers, the water mains or something like that? This creates a rod for their back, potentially. So we've got no particular plans, so it'll be our kids. But it's just the imposition of these sort of bureaucratic restrictions that weren't talked through. I think we didn't know the report was ever being done until we got the notification from the Hastings. Nobody bothered to talk to us about the state of the property. We could have arranged for them to go in and have a look. The interior's significantly modified as it was when we bought it. We didn't do those, so there's nothing much inside it that's original. There's a little bit, but not much. So I don't know.
Thank you.
But you don't want laws just for the sake of having laws. Quite frankly, that's what kills capital investment. And Napier needs capital investment, and you scare it, and this sort of thing scares people off. So you've got to think about that in the bigger picture of the city. It's a real problem.
Okay, thank you. I believe Commissioner Van Volkenhuizen has a question for staff.
Just for the officers, are you able to inform us what's the heritage status of the adjoining property number 25?
25 Harding.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not. It's
Nothing.
No.
Okay.
If you look at 24 hours from the seafront, to the right there's a relatively new two-storey building. Further along's one with potholes on it. Portholes, not potholes, portholes. One further toward the Iron Pot entrance is a place on the corner that's semi-derelict, I think. There's obviously people live there. I mean, you've got an absolute mishmash there. So while heritage is all very well, you know, somebody should have thought about that 100 years ago when you see the facade of Harding Road. And with all the conditions that are on the properties nearer the port, you're having to, if you do anything there, you've got to give the port some discretionary override. You know, no place for old men, to coin a phrase, and I'm one of them.
Okay.
But it's all very well having a heritage dream, but you've got to get practical.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buck. I think there's no more questions.
Do you want to, Graham, do you want to talk about Smithy?
At morning tea. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Buck. We will take a short adjournment for morning tea and resume the hearing at 10:20. I think Dr. Gwen is back in front of us then. So until then, enjoy the break. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Schofield has had to go have his knee examined at the Wellesley Road Medical Centre. He had a fall last night, so I'm now taking over chairing of the hearing. And at this stage, we're hearing from Robin Gwynn. Good morning and welcome again, Mr. Gwynn. You appeared for us yesterday, so you know the drill. We've read your pre-circulated material, but we're very look forward to hearing any verbal points that you wish to make to us at this stage.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Yes, I don't envy you the detail of what you're doing. You may recall from yesterday that what I actually submitted to the proposed district plan was one submission, and the one submission was actually about lack of consultation. Now, this wasn't one of the things that council wanted to hear about, I presume, so it doesn't appear under that way. It's appeared rather in different sections. So yesterday I was speaking about road works, and today I'm principally intending to speak about the cathedral issue, which is clearly what you're focusing on here. You might remember I also said I did explain that I did not know, after reading the 2,000 plus pages, what the vision for the future of Napier was, and I felt I should, and any actually person who's done this should, and I just didn't, and that's going to be highly relevant to what I have to say. So I'm actually going to start off with myself and where I'm coming from, and the bit of my submission that's particularly relevant, which you should have somewhere in front of you, is the bit about the cathedral. I spelt out who I was because I thought it's relevant. I'm a historian. I don't pretend to be a city planner. But I'm a professional historian at formerly Massey University. And I am a parishioner, ordinary parishioner of the Napier Cathedral. I'm a life member of the Historic Places, sort of, well, they're relevant, potentially relevant issues to my own personal background. I'm no part of ancient Hawke's Bay families who have been here since the beginning. I didn't arrive here until the 1980s. And if you'd asked me what were the things that attracted my wife and I to come to live here, no doubt we would have mentioned beaches and good weather and Hawke's Bay wineries, but I would certainly also have said things that other people might not notice. One is that Napier actually has a very strong sense of history. It's probably the result of 1931, but it does. If I'd been asked about buildings that I thought really mattered in Napier, I would have said the hospital, which we then had, and the cathedral, because both of them stood for saying our city didn't just stand for the economy, important though that was, but it stood also for the things that looked after people's well-being in other ways. And I think from there, I don't want to waste a lot of time in the past, but I'd like, for my own personal story, to jump to the cyclone. We all remember the cyclone, but not probably in the same way. And I met the cyclone not actually in Napier. I was on holiday. My wife and I were on holiday. We'd gone to Great Barrier Island. That is where the cyclone first hit. So we met the cyclone in Great Barrier Island. We then spent several days trapped, and when eventually we got out of Great Barrier Island, we flew for all the distance between there and here over the flooded lands of the 9, areas which all declared national emergencies, ending up with our own here. It was an experience which certainly said to me, this ends the discussion on climate change. It is clearly the problem for our time, and there isn't any other equivalent problem of that sort of magnitude. That's also part of what has developed my thinking on things that are happening. And at the same time, I found that within the cathedral parish of which I'm a member, there were also people who were looking at what was happening and thinking about climate change and looking at particularly European examples of what cathedrals were doing to try and meet it. So they had studied, for example, the number of cathedrals in Europe that had now had solar panels, and what they were trying to do to encourage people to accept. We're now in a new age, and we have to work in a new kind of way. And then we had to try and build it into our own lives. Incidentally, the sort of places that now have solar panels, for example, in Britain, include Salisbury with its immense tower, which dominates the neighbourhood where it is. Clearly, this was thought by at least the planners in Britain to be significantly more important than worrying about the clauses that no doubt protected heritage. And that's part of what I want to say, I suppose, that I feel that heritage is important. I've no doubt about it. As I say, I'm a life member of the Historic Places Trust. But common sense is important too, and common sense is also very rare, and no one actually sets out to protect it. I'm sorry I'm turning pages, but I'm missing what I particularly want, which is annoying. I think I've finally got there. The Napier City Council, the central city in Napier, and the Anglican Diocese of Waiapu share a particular problem with one building here, and that's the cathedral. Councillors in Napier would have been well aware, from the example of Christchurch in recent years, that there is substantial potential for division in the community over the issue of cathedrals. And that is no less true in Napier than it would be true in Christchurch, because actually I think Napier may be unique. I said is in my submission. I have a query in my mind, back of my mind, about Auckland, but anyway, Auckland does its own things because of its wealth and different status. But as far as Napier is concerned, there's been a cathedral here for very nearly as long as there's been a settlement, a European settlement, and it has always had a close civic attachment. And I emphasize civic attachment. I don't think the City Council can ignore that. I think it's trying to. I don't think it can. Some of the very saddest stories in 1931 from the earthquake relate to the cathedral, in which at least one person was trapped, and there was no physical way of removing the masonry that had trapped her. In 1950, Napier was having a week of celebrations marking attaining city status, and there was a Cathedral Day of Giving. The appeal for that was the appeal for that was not simply within the cathedral, it was community-wide. It was supported by the local paper, then the Hawke's Bay Today, and it was conducted at the same time as the civic celebrations. As part of my argument, I do not think you can actually divorce the cathedral from Napier's history, and I don't think you can divorce either from considering the historic places element of it. To me, it is actually the fact that Napier has in its fairly short existence, built a cathedral, had to rebuild it from scratch, not once, but twice. I don't, and done it from its own resources, and I don't know anywhere else, if it's not Auckland, where there are cathedrals where that has happened. And I think it says a lot for the importance of the cathedral in Napier. Towards, I think I need to find the precise place where I was at. Sorry. I beg your pardon. Some months ago, the Napier City Council decided to declare the cathedral as a Heritage 1 site. Now, I'm a member of the cathedral parish, by which I mean I attend church there fairly regularly every Sunday. I had no idea that this matter was going to be discussed by the City Council at all. If I'd had, I would have had something to say to someone. So I'm sympathetic with the last speaker who was complaining about failure of consultation. But as a past councillor myself, what would I have wanted to do if I wanted to do anything at the end of last year? Probably, if I'm honest, I would have said it's the end of the cyclone, and probably the less we can do to stir things up, the better. And I might very well have voted for something that says let's do nothing, and until a more convenient and suitable time. Another alternative, though, which Council, I don't know whether it even considered, and I would have certainly supported on the grounds of Napier's history, is to declare the cathedral a priority building. Didn't do that. What it did instead was to declare it a Heritage 1 site, which has very particular financial responsibilities implicit. I don't think the people who voted for that have the slightest idea how many people normally attend the cathedral on Sunday mornings. I do. I know very well last Sunday, 74 at the largest service. I think as my understanding of that rule means that the parish, which doesn't own it, could in fact walk out. Presumably it would have to put the whole thing in cotton wool so that it wasn't endangering people. It could then walk away and hand over the keys. Now, I see you're due to be hearing from the people who represent the parish, or rather the diocese, later today. So they deal with this because it's their business. I don't have any particular status other than a normal member of the congregation, so I cannot speak for them. But as I looked at Council's decision, the most likely thing I could see was precisely that. Put the whole thing in cotton wool and allow it to fall down over 100 years. But how could that possibly be said to be good for Napier, or the Napier Central Business District, or an area that gets tourist ships? It's nonsense. It has no sense. So, as I say, what I actually want is a common sense approach, and it starts with consultation, not actually with councils making decisions and then trying to work out what on earth do we now do. What I would ask you to do is to put that decision on hold until proper consultation's been had. And that should include regular parishioners. Undoubtedly should and must include the diocesan authorities. I don't think they've done as well as they might in consultation either. But I think we have a real problem with that consultation issue. But as far as I could see of the possibilities open to Council when it made that particular decision, I cannot think of a worse one. I just can't envisage anything as bad for the city, or the cathedral, or anyone else. It's a case where I think history trumps the rules of that you are looking at in great depth, for reasons of common sense. Um, in my own life, my family has looked at the situation that confronts us, and we have worked out a whole series of things that we have to do to try and come to terms with it. I mention them not because they're relevant to you, but simply because to say we've taken this matter reasonably seriously. We have, for instance, a smaller car. It's an electric vehicle. It's parked somewhere outside. We have panels on our roof. We have several members of the family who are coming up towards their 21st, and our celebration for their 21st will not be the sort that it would have been 20 years ago, but we'll do something to encourage them to take on board the whole issue of climate change and how they're responding to it. And at the same time, the church group, a church group of which I'm a member, was going to Vestry, having spent some months working out possibilities for what the cathedral could do faced by the situation. You will have seen, if you've looked down on the city from anywhere, and I'm sorry I can't suggest to you that you should get into a coach and go and look down at the city from Clyde Road, where I live, where you will see the cathedral in the forefront and the city behind it, and you will see exactly the grouping between the two that I'm talking about. But the cathedral is a large building with a very large roof, and given the European examples, the parish group I was part of was looking at this and thinking, well, couldn't we use the cathedral roof to use it for solar panels, firstly to draw the attention of the whole city to the fact that we needed to do something, secondly to emphasize that Napier is about as sunny a city as you could hope for, and it's ideal for solar panels, and thirdly, if we could generate more electricity than we actually needed, it could be used by the city for whatever purposes it thought to be sensible. So all of those areas sort of ended up in the mishmash of persuading me that I needed to submit. But what I really want to see coming out of this is better consultation. I would like to see the City Council here sitting down with the Regional Council, which meets quite separately. I don't know how often they actually meet. I wish they met more often. But if the main problem facing us, as I believe, is climate change, I wish they would get together and come up with a vision for what we're doing. I don't know what this vision is, so I don't know what I'm supposed to be supporting. Similarly, I think there are certain people who do need to be consulted, and I think if you're going to do something like throwing a lot of new rules at a building like the cathedral and a situation like the cathedral, there does need to be consultation, not just with the diocese, where I'm sure they've got an expert who knows exactly what they want to see done, but the people who are attending. Hasn't been. So, so on the really serious issues that I've found confronting us, I've had plenty of family meetings, and we've worked through a plan for what we can do about it, and would do about it if we were challenged. And we've told the dean and an officer what that would be. But I'd really like to see it going much deeper in terms of consultation from the grassroots up. And I know, for instance, I'm certainly a supporter of the wards that we've now got. We've got a total ward system. Well, I have a property on the hill and in which I live, and a property in Green Meadows, which is let out to the Whatever It Takes Trust. So I've got a property in two different ones of our wards. Neither of them has called a ward meeting, more or less in living memory. That's not quite true. I think there was one once on the Hill. But there is certainly no regular system for consultation. There desperately needs to be. I mean, on the Hill, one of the things about the Hill is if we are faced by a major earthquake and what have you, the general advice is go up. That means onto the Hill, but there hasn't actually been much discussion about this, and the routes down from the Hill have largely been broken in the last year or two. Some of them are being repaired even now, which is why if you go to Clyde Road, you can't go and look down on Napier because, unfortunately, the council has put it out of bounds at the present. My submission, as I said, was fundamentally about being heard. And that being heard does mean starting with people who don't normally pay much attention to what's going on in council, don't read, as perhaps they should on a weekly basis, what the council's news may be, no longer have a giveaway paper because the one we used to have isn't delivered on the Hill anyway. I feel this is actually a really fundamental issue which I would like to be somewhere in the district plan, being discussed by everyone. And I think I'll pause there, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that or anything else I can usefully say.
Yep, thank you very much for that. I'll see if we have questions for you, Commissioner Brosnan. Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Gwynn, as always. One of the questions I think I have for you is similar to one I asked the previous submitter when we're focused today on the heritage rules in the district plan, and that is your submission. When I read through it, I was initially confused around your position on the heritage value of the cathedral, but I think you've clarified that for me today. It is in conflict with the submission received from Waipu directly, and I just wonder if you've got any additional comment on the heritage value of the building itself, acknowledging that there are a range of other values associated with the place, cultural and spiritual, etc.
Well, there certainly are features of the cathedral which are very striking. Essentially, to me, the most important thing is that there is a cathedral.
Its existence.
Which has been destroyed, and there's been enough resilience to rebuild it. That's actually the most significant lesson to be learnt from Napier's Cathedral. And at the back of the cathedral there is a cross. It's made of medieval nails from Coventry, destroyed in World War II by bombing. Gifted from Coventry Cathedral to Napier Cathedral, destroyed by earthquake in 1931, both being rebuilt in the 1950s, which is a wonderful story of resilience. And I'm quite sure that could be saved quite easily, but otherwise, I make no pretense to speak for the cathedral authorities. I don't know. Haven't seen a specific copy of what they submitted to you. Hopefully I will turn up today, so I'll get to learn a bit more. But to me, the single most important feature about the cathedral in Napier is that we have one, we still have one, despite the disruptions that have meant that we've had to build it twice over with pretty limited resources. I found it really interesting that Council's dictum about becoming a heritage site said absolutely nothing about whatever assistance, if any, Council might be able to provide. I think it needs to look at that quite hard, actually. But essentially, I want a vision, and I can't find it. I mean, after 1931, Napier had its Napier 30,000 campaign, which was the Napier community saying, what are we going to do to come to terms with the situation after the earthquake? Well, where's the equivalent? Where is it being, who is publicising it? Not the council, as far as I know. Who is leading it? How do you take part in it? I don't know any of those things. I'm not aware there is one.
All right, well, thank you for that. Any further questions?
Oh, that's fine.
No,
Thank you.
fine.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gwynn. I don't have any further questions either. I think it's very clear what your views are. You've enunciated them yesterday and again reiterated them this morning, and certainly understand your concerns about the cathedral. We'll take that into account when we consider what, if any, amendments should be made to the district plan to address those issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next submitter, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, but my name's mispronounced all the time. So Michael Kila. All right, it's not too bad then, is it? So good morning and welcome. I'm not sure if you've been watching on the live stream or not, but just to let you know that anything you pre-circulated, including your original submission, we've read, so you don't need to read that out. But if you're tabling new information, as you are now, then we'd like you to present that to us.
Thank you very much.
No, thanks.
Michael?
It feels thick, but it's all pictures. Very much in the flavour of homemade cut and paste. No PowerPoint here. So, good morning. I'm Michael Kokala of 2 Sanders Ave, Mariwa, Napier. Do you mind if I stand?
You're welcome to stand, but don't do so on our account. If you'd like to sit, that's fine
No.
too.
Easy to talk when I'm standing. This is my son, John Luke. He's my youngest son.
Morning, John.
They're aged between
Hello.
11 and 34.
Hello.
So he's my support person today. He's here to remind us that it's not only about the adults' view on the world, that our little people... Anyway, I'll get on with it. So turn over to page 1. So in Fig 1 there is the location of the property. So I'm here to address the factors in the Heritage Art Deco neighbourhood. There's been no allowance made for corner sites for fencing, and I'll lead this submission through about what I'm talking about with that. You can see in Fig 1, it's a corner site. I have 78 linear metres of road frontage, which is a lot of burn to mow. We have no backyard. It was built in 1947, 1 metre from the back boundary. It's on the edge of the Art Deco Heritage Zone. Number 4, the neighbour, which is also in the photograph, is the only Art Deco neighbour. All of Herrick Street on the other side, which we actually open up to, and the front 4 houses on Sanders Avenue, including the 6 infill units, are general residential. Traditionally, when the subdivision was developed in Art Deco style, the majority of lots were designed with front and back yards. As you can see in, as number 4 is, it's got a huge big backyard and a front yard. In Fig 2, I've taken a snip of 2 properties in Logan Avenue. They have the front yard with the low Art Deco fences and the backyards where they can have a life. With the introduction of heritage front fencing, protection limitations and 5 to 7 metre building setbacks, which I mean is between the old district plan and the proposed district plan, corner lots have been overlooked and as a result subjected to unreasonable discriminatory barriers, i.e. room to build or extend or private yard space. Just like to point out at this time, we're under a myriad of limitations there. We are in a hazard zone area. We've got the 5 to 7 metre setback, which makes it virtually impossible for us to build anywhere. We can't do anything. We can't fart, burp or anything without getting resource consent, and then we don't even know if we can get granted it.
not to mention insurance and anything like that. So it's a bit depressing for a neighbourhood that's quite happy and sunny. So on to page 2, the outlook from our house, non-heritage zone with a myriad of designs across the road there you can see. It's not a pretty landscape. And then in Fig 4, an exposed thoroughfare corner entering State Highway 2, which is Georges Drive, so it's Sanders Ave going up to Georges Drive. Just to the right of that photo, it cuts back into Herrick Street. People travel there as a thoroughfare from Taradale Road to Georges Drive quite regularly, and when there's any council work done on any of the intersections around the district, from Pettigrew Corner to Hyderabad Road to Mariwa Shops, Kennedy Road, they all come through our way. So we're right on the corner side, we're in that front, and they come out off Georges Drive into Sanders Ave and scream around that corner and take off. Granted to council, wonderful job down on Douglas McLean with the hump. That slowed a bit down with the humps along there. It slowed a little bit of traffic down. And the other thing that we've noticed, been noticeable, is the removal of the Carnell flats has really removed the criminal activity in the area. I've got no proof of that, but it's a give me really. A fencing at 1.8 metres height is the only protection for our family, protection our family has from the following: noise, dogs, traffic. You get privacy. Turn on to page 3, vandals and thieves. So you see in Fig 5, that is our Herrick Street side of the property, which is actually walk on. There is no fencing there. We had the guys across the road put their recycling out, the two brothers, and some yahoos came past and picked up all the bottles out of the recycling bins and threw them on our driveway. We counted 14 tops and smashed glass all over our driveway. Why? Because they could just, it was open, right? It's just, and that's what Art Deco offers, open front yards. And I had an old Vanguard estate from back in the old days that I was working on. They came onto the drive, climbed up where I'd removed the gas tank, climbed and removed all the valuable parts and tools that I had in there. Across the road, 2 houses across the road from that opening on Herrick Street is open walk-on. One house, they've walked in, not bowled the front door out and ripped off the jewellery inside. The next house, they've walked in, down the driveway, taking push pods. In the front of our section, we've never had anybody enter our section because it's completely fenced. Right round there. It's got a wooden fence up there. And it's not, it was like that when we bought it. It's not supposed to be there. And there's no way we're removing it, right? But we want to do it the right way. And we've had no security problems. The only invaders we get in there are cats. And they don't come when the dog's out. So, you also see there in Fig 6, there's a door there, which is the side of the garage. Once again, walk on. They've jimmied that door open and gotten in there, and it was empty. It was just before we moved in. So, but that's just because it's been able to walk in. Moving on to the next page, page 4. So Fig 7 and Fig 8, my two youngest boys. You can see they're in what is our backyard, which would be, if it was an Art Deco traditional fence, would be the front exposed corner side, right? They're out there, they're playing, they're safe. 1.8 metre fencing gives us a backyard for family, safety, security, privacy, enjoyment, stability, a reiterating stranger danger. So these guys can play in there. Their balls stay in the property because the fence is there. They haven't got people walking in, walking off. If they were younger kids, they could be vulnerable because it's all exposed. But it's not exposed at the moment. They've got a really good environment. The dog. So the dog, we're a good, safe pet keeping home, according to the council. We get the special rate because we've got a fenced yard, right? And the dog can't go out of there and nobody can come in. Now, we get a lot of dog walkers in the district. They will walk down around Sanders, Logan Ave, come over from Napier South, and they go along Douglas McLean Creekway, right? And they walk their dogs. And if we didn't have a fenced yard or a low fence, right, that they could see through, the dog would be running around there going, yap, 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 and they'd be all going yap, 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 and that would happen constantly because of the amount of dog walkers. Because we've got the fence there, the only time that dog yaps is when I walk around to go and see my neighbour, and he knows it's me. And he's going, Dad, come home. I want to come too, you know. So that's quite a lot to do for noise and neighbours and that sort of stuff. So that's what the fence also provides there. And then I've got Dad's Corner, you can see in Fig 9. So I'm a tradie. That's only a little bit of my stuff. I've got my valuable stuff locked away, but I need an area where I can put my stuff. Now, if we had no fence there and it was a low Art Deco fence, who would want to look at that? You know, and also I couldn't leave like wheelbarrows and compressor hoses out or water blaster hoses out. They'd go walking pretty quickly. So out of sight, out of mind. On to the next page, page 5. You see my family sitting on our deck on the Fig 10 there, on page 5. On the right-hand side, you'll see the fence. That's on Sanders Ave, which outlooks over that myriad of ugly old houses. Hope no one owns them that's here. Sorry if I offended you if you do. If you're standing there and that fence wasn't there, would you be comfortable walking past this family looking right into their home and their time, you know? And then if you look down on Fig 11, you can see the ranch slider. If you're standing where that fence is in Fig 10, you'd be looking straight into that ranch slider into our dining room. Okay, so that's our private area. That's a place that we can be as a family without everybody walking past looking at us and et cetera, et cetera. Now, as Fig 11, do we revert back to single 3mm glass wooden sash windows? And you can see that's first period aluminium joinery, ugly as. Someone put it in there back in the 70s. What I mean by that is that how many changes, what is the consistency to keeping Art Deco profile over practicality? So just recently, there's a couple of houses down our street that have had solar panels put on the roof. You walk down the street, you can see the solar panels sticking out up above the Art Deco facades, right? Windows, healthier homes, people getting double glazing in, they put aluminium joinery in. That's what we'll eventually do with that when we can afford it. So that's all changing the concept of the Art Deco. What I'm trying to say here is, you know, what's good for one thing, what's good for another. It's about practicality. So I'm not trying to fight the fact that we need to keep heritage sites or Art Deco homes. I'm just giving examples of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So if we move over to page 6, on Fig 12, you can see the washing on the line. Do we want the public gazing upon the family laundry? So that fence is onto Sanders Ave, a tour bus delight. So do we really want people, tour bus driving past, lose all our, you know, family washing hanging on the line? Well, that's not Art Deco. And, but that's our backyard. And to be honest, if there's no fence there, we would be having to use the electric dryer, right? Which is not energy efficient in the way that we're going in this world these days. And we can't afford to use the electric dryer, you know? So we should be able to have that privacy. Also, you can see the lemon tree. We've got other fruit trees in the yard, the plum trees. I've just put in a load of veggies into that little garden around there. You can see the edge of the barbecue. We've got a barbecue and a Weber. They would all go walking. They wouldn't be still there. That's all part of our lifestyle. And so that's an important part, is not having a backyard. We need an area where we can have all these things. If you look in figure 13 and 14, there's a couple of examples of 1.8 metre high stucco fences, okay? So that's just a couple of quick shots that I've taken going around the neighbourhood or in different areas. I think that one in Fig 13 is the neighbour to a councillor in a heritage zone, and the other one is in Onikawa. So our fence at the moment is a wooden fence, pale fence. It was stuck there. I got hold of council and I said, I hate the fence, but we need the fence for security. Can I replace it with a stucco fence? No, you can't. What can I replace it with? You can replace it with like, but it's a wooden fence. No, you can replace it with like. I think she was inaccurate. I don't think that was true at all. I think there's a height restriction of like 600 mil, and you can get resource consent to go up to 1.2, and it has to be a balustrade fence, which gives you no security, privacy. All right, so whoever stuck that fence that we paid for when we bought the house 5 years ago, which we couldn't get the information for in 2019 because we went to get the information on the property, and council said, oh, we have to move buildings and all the information is not available at the moment, it hasn't been digitalised or something like that. So we sort of bought it, and there was a housing shortage, and we wanted to get out of where we were because of other socioeconomic issues, and we wanted to get in there, and that's what we bought, and then we found out this whole treasure chest of issues. So anyway, in my summary, corner sites have predominant street frontage with houses built back on back boundaries. So remember this, I'm only talking about corner sites, I'm not stripping down the whole Art Deco scene. This allows for little or no backyard space, private, safe or secure areas. Over the decades, times have changed, the community's needs and living requirements. This includes house designs for healthy homes, more people, more traffic, lower socioeconomic living, and more awareness on the safety and well-being of our children. Every man, woman and child should feel safe in their home and be entitled to the basic requirements of privacy and security, be it hanging out knickers and bras on the washing line, growing vegetables, having children play in the yard, to socialise with family and friends, to relax and read a book in private on your deck, or to have the fundamental right of a person's home as their castle. The Kiwi dream of the quarter-acre section when the Art Deco homes were built has long since disappeared. We should be mindful that in wanting to keep intact and or restore these homes, that the fundamental requirement of a family home, of which they were designed to be originally, a family home, is also preserved, and that we are not imprisoning our community and ratepayers inside the Looking Glass Zoo for bus tours, thus being robbed of an individual's fundamental human right. My objective here is not to tear down the need to keep and preserve or even re-establish heritage homes. It is indeed to reinforce that corner site homes and heritage areas have been overlooked as expressed in my submission. A compromise needs to be found that doesn't involve having to pay for professionals and to apply for resource consents and to be refused those on such a straightforward scheme change, which we're asking here today, on allowing 1.8 metre high stucco fence on Art Deco corner sites. So I'm not asking that you guys to look at saying anyone can have any style 1.8 metre high fence around their property like we do currently have. I'm just asking that there be allowance, a criteria that says you can put in a 1.8 metre high fence on a corner site in a heritage Art Deco zone that fits in with the concept of the period and the style, which is stucco and or balustrade. So that's my big verbal.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. Just before I see if the commissioners have any questions for you, I think, Fleur, at the start you said that you were considering some amendments to your recommendations relating to fences and heritage areas. Does that apply to this submission?
Yes, my comments were specifically in relation to the Napier South heritage area.
So not this submitted?
No, but however, I've obviously heard his comments just now, and yeah, I can see that there is some scope for relooking at those rules, and in a way that we can still preserve the heritage values of the area, whilst also providing privacy and security on those corner sites, which are very difficult to provide for, with those matters. There's no backyard as such, so I'm happy to relook at those.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Taylor, any questions? Commissioner Brosnan?
Thank you, Michael, for your submission and your presentation. I think in your presentation and your submission, you sort of asked for flexibility to be able to manage the issues you're talking about. It struck me as you were speaking that there was a likelihood, and I wanted your view on it, that existing corner sites who are faced with the same sort of layout challenges that you laid out for your properties probably have some existing fencing or barriers put up in place. So if you agree with that statement, that they've probably taken steps already to, say, put up a fence like your predecessors of your property have, do you think that if we were to focus our consideration of the rules on replacement structures, fences, rather than, say, allowing new structures on corner sites where you're in a similar situation, that might allay some of your concerns?
So like if I said I want to replace an existing fence, that would be allowed, so I could change it to a stucco fence? Is that what you mean?
I was going to say, if we focused our consideration on replacement structures, so without having talked through the detail, not necessarily like for like, but same, for instance, height in the Art Deco style, that would allay the concerns. So no new fences, even on corner sites, would go up?
I'm not quite following you. I'm sort of of the belief that if somebody on a corner site, there's not many of them, I think there's three of us in the Art Deco area. The one on George's Drive, which is opposite the motel, which is your classic looking Art Deco home, but they've still been able to maintain a backyard because they've got a backyard area. There's another one on Logan Ave. I'm talking about that are actually Art Deco. I don't even know why it's in the Art Deco zone because it's not an Art Deco house. But they've got yard space, so then it just comes down to me. And with me, the problem with my property is like I said, the brown wooden fence out there, I think was illegally put up 15 years ago. And someone just slapped it up. We didn't realise. We come along and bought the property. And the house was notoriously known as a drug house back in the day. And a party house, and I've found some old photos of it, and it was just a pigsty. And over the years, the last 25 years, successive owners have slowly upgraded it and brought it up to a really presentable property. So I guess my submission is that council needs to look at the fact is that if you're trying to preserve Art Deco frontage, well, houses that have backyards, that's fine, because they've got a living space. But if you haven't got a living space, you're absolutely stifling the property owner, and what can they do?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Yuban. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Kukulau. You've heard that the staff are going to reconsider their recommendations to us, and I think I'm certainly very aware of the issue you're raising. The erection of a fence doesn't alter the Art Deco status of the house, it just alters the ability of the public to see that house, but the heritage values of the house remain intact. So I think we'll be giving some consideration to some kind of practical response to the issues that you raised. So thanks very much for coming in this morning.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much, all of you. And thanks to the background staff that are sorted it all out for the agenda and everything.
Now, the next submitter on our list is Heritage New Zealand, Dean Raymond. Morning and welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Dean Raymond tōku ingoa. So you have my statement of evidence.
Yes.
Take that as read. So
Yes.
I don't have any additional presentation or much to add, just a few comments or highlights, if that's okay. I'll
Yep, that's good, thank you.
now. So as I note in my paragraphs 7 and 8, basically I'm very supportive of the heritage provisions of the proposed plan as notified, and also the recommended changes which the council staff have put in the 42A report. So, and I know and I see that heritage is hugely important to Napier, and I think that's really reflected in the plan. Just touching briefly on some of the places which Heritage New Zealand asked for and be included in Schedule 3, and taking that the recommendation that some of these places need more research and more assessment. So I think that approach is right. And basically, if a place does have the heritage values that meet the assessment criteria and the threshold, then they should be included in the district plan. If it hasn't been determined yet, then it's a matter for another time. And as I note in my evidence, one of those places that would fall in that category is the place known as Otatara Homestead, which I've included a couple of photos of, just pinpointing where that is in relation to the Institute and Otatara Pa further to the west there. But again, it's the same category of it needs a bit more work and assessment to see whether or not it does meet those criteria. And I think the only change that I've recommended in addition to what the council staff have put up is very minor, and it's in relation to the new category in Schedule 3 of for Rita Angus's house, family house. And the reason for my suggestion is that historic place is the terminology which Heritage New Zealand Pāori Tonga uses for Category 1, Category 2 historic places, and that's a nationwide list and categorisation. So I think there's a potential for that to be confusing even for future users of the district plan who may not look at the reasons why that was put in there as it is. So I don't know if notable place is the absolutely best alternative, but I think an alternative to calling it historic place would be a good idea. I acknowledge the reasons for putting it in as a place having intangible historic values rather than values based on the physical presence of the house that's still there as it is at the moment. And just touching on the rules for accessory buildings, there was Heritage New Zealand submitted that there should be allow for accessory buildings up to 10 square metres. Kāinga Ora said there should be 80. I think the recommendation of 30 square metres, which is what I comment on my paragraph 27, I think that strikes the right balance. I'm just turning to one of the previous submitters, John Buck. I believe he was talking about a property at 24 Hardinge Road. Mm-hmm. He mentioned Heritage New Zealand has been restrictive, there's been restrictive covenants on the property, etc. In relation to that property, it's not included on the New Zealand Heritage list, and I'm not aware of any interactions with Heritage New Zealand in relation to that property. There's no restrictive covenants that I'm aware of on that. So I think, I assume he's probably talking about the council's scheduling as part of his process, not he was actually referring to Heritage New Zealand in error in that instance. The only other thing is, just this morning I've seen the new recommendations for HH Policy 7, the demolition policy.
Yep.
So I haven't had a lot of time to respond. I do understand the need for a consenting pathway, and that what was written in the 42A report seemed to be too limiting or too strict for owners of places which want to demolish and need to find a way to do that if they meet certain standards. It shouldn't be an easy thing to do, but it should be a consenting pathway. I still have an issue with the phrase of significant public benefit. I know quite a few councils are putting that in a district plan, but I haven't really seen a definition of what that means, and in my mind, it could be quite open depending on the council's needs or the owner's needs. What is public benefit for the building or not? So I do get the change which has been put forward to that policy, and the first part A of that policy, that makes perfect sense to me. Second part, I'm not sure. And with part 2 of the policy, no reasonable alternative, I think that's also appropriate.
Yeah.
So I think that's all I need to say at this stage, and happy to see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much for that. It's always refreshing to see where peace is broken out between a submitter and the reporting officers. So I'm pleased to read your evidence where it was largely in agreement with the recommendations. I'll see if we have any questions for you, Commissioner Brosnan.
Thank you very much for your submission. It was very thorough. I would just like to get an understanding from you on something. Some of our submitters in response to listed items have essentially opposed the inclusion in the district plan on the basis that they're not on the Heritage New Zealand Pohiri-Taonga list, and I just wanted to understand that process and if you had a view on that as a reason for not including an item in a district plan.
Yeah. So the New Zealand Heritage List, Rārangi Kōrero, is a nationwide list according to, and it comes under the Heritage New Zealand Pohiri-Taonga Act 2014. Category 1, Category 2, historic areas, wahi tapu, wahi tupuna. So those are all the categories in that list. So it's nationally significant places. Many councils, probably the majority, also have their own list or schedule or inventory of heritage. And there may be many places which are very significant for Napier, locally significant, regionally significant. They may or may not be nationally significant. And just because a place isn't on either of those lists doesn't mean it doesn't have heritage value. So there are places which, in terms of Heritage New Zealand process, have not been nominated yet or have not been put forward to inclusion on the list. So there is that process as well. So I think it's just the scope for local and regional significance, and I think that's appropriate that the council has some of those places included.
Thank you.
Commissioner Taylor? Just two matters from me. First of all, thank you for your suggestion about the use of the terminology notable place. I think we certainly understand the issues you've raised about the confusion with historic place, which people have different understandings of. And when you gave your verbal presentation, you gave a very brief verbal definition of what you thought a notable place might entail. I don't know if you recall doing that, but you spoke about some qualities that might make something a notable place. I was wondering if you could just give that some more thought and write down, not now, but at your leisure, and provide it to our hearings administrator on what you think a useful definition of notable place could be.
Okay, I can do that.
Yep. And certainly understand your point you raised about new recommended HHP 7 item clause 1B, which would require a decision maker to assess and weigh two subjective matters. Firstly, the significant public benefit, and secondly, the adverse effects of the loss of historic heritage. As a decision maker, I don't know how I would do that. So we understand there's potentially some issues with that clause. In terms of the issues that Heritage New Zealand deals with nationwide, do you think you'd be able to provide, and again, not now, but maybe give it some thought and talk to your colleagues about some alternative wording that would achieve the same outcome that Clause B is trying to achieve? Just try to draw on any expertise or experience that you have on similar sort of issues.
Yeah, I can work on that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And in terms of timing, if we said within the next sort of week and a half to provide that information to us,
Yeah,
that'd be okay?
can do that. Yep.
That'd be very good. Thank you very much. But apart
Okay.
from that, no further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Now, our next submitter is Marist Holdings, Green Meadows Limited. Come on up. So good morning, gentlemen. Welcome. If you'd like to introduce yourselves to us, and just to let you know that we've read all your pre-circulated material, so thank you very much for preparing that and circulating it. You don't need to read that out loud to us, but you're very welcome to speak to that and highlight key points for us, and then we'll see if we have any questions for you. But other than that, over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Philip Mackay taku ingoa. I have with me Peter Holly, the Chief Executive of Mission Estate, which is an entity of Marist Holdings Green Meadows Limited. So Peter has a presentation which he's going to talk to, and I think the pictures in that presentation are quite valuable for filling in gaps that words can't provide. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, that the evidence has been pre-read. I just simply refer to paragraph 4 of my evidence, which is the conclusion of the executive summary. Just to reiterate that it remains the preference of Marist Holdings Green Meadows to remove the mission building from Schedule 3. The conclusion of my planning evidence that the most appropriate outcome for the submission is for it to be accepted in part, and changing the categorisation in Schedule 3 from the B group listing to, I've got their historic place, but I did just hear with interest the submission of Heritage New Zealand, and I agree that notable place would actually be more appropriate and less confusing than historic place. And obviously the reasons are in my evidence for why that's my conclusion. But we would like now for Peter to present his presentation and then take questions after that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a long story, but it's a short story too. So by way of background, I came to New Zealand from South Africa and was employed by the Society of Mary before Marist Holdings was actually incorporated. The contract was for 12 months, and it was to sell the mission. That was my task. I have a business background and some well-developed strategic capability, so it was a natural fit for the society to divest the entire mission in Hawke's Bay as we know it. I went to Auckland and got some valuation work done and came back, and it was pitiful. It was absolutely worth nothing. And the building was particularly in bad shape and run down, and it wasn't fit for purpose. So we set about looking at what we needed in the future going forward. And this was purely commercial for a building that had no heritage status on it at all. We could have burned it down, we could have pulled it down, we could have done anything we wanted. And in fact, the first initiative we took was to build a deck on the side of the building, and that was to enlarge our restaurant facility. So that was the first lunge. The second, and probably the more important driving reason, was we didn't have office space. We didn't have a place for our cellar door, and we didn't have a restaurant, but we had an old building, and so we started to work on that. But at the same time, we had a huge amount of deferred maintenance on all of these old buildings, and they were not dedicated or purposeful for any other use. The Guinea Hostel, which I'll show you now, was a low budget accommodation. We had in the year that I was there, the first year, probably 3 sexual assaults. There were cars stolen out of Napier and abandoned up there, and it was really a den of iniquity. So by lowering that building and then rededicating the site, we've been able to achieve quite a lot. But it's a commercial proposition around a winery, and dedicated for that purpose. So I'll go through that with you. Now, I'm assuming the forward arrow gets us to the right place? Yes? No? Yep. Okay, thank you. Right, so the building started off in Miani. When we did the renovation work, we did an architectural survey on it. It was comprised of 11 buildings in total, and it had been rebuilt over a period of time. Going back to the original ledgers that came out of Miani, it was apparent that the society was trading wine for building material, so it was a barter system in the 1870s. So this building was built down in Miani and then dragged up the hill. Now that's on our wall, it's part of our heritage. Everybody likes the story.
it's quite unique. And that picture on the lower right-hand side really shows you what a stark place that was. And not a lot going for it, but it was a seminary building intended exclusively for the formation of men into the priesthood. That was the sole purpose of that building. Moving along, this is what it looked like around about 1918, thereabouts. So you can see the back end of the building. The 3-storey building there is the Guinea Hostel. The building next door to that is, strangely enough, Villa Maria. It was a house called Villa Maria, and the nuns used to live there at one stage. The house on the far left-hand side was the brothers' house. Now, if we move forward from that position, and the infamous concert paddock is in the foreground now, which was under vines, and we use that now for outdoor entertainment. So, hustling along, that building on the top left-hand side was the St. Peter's building. The beehive on the right-hand side was the apiary, and that's where honey was made and sold as part of the society's work. And then the brothers' house we've spoken about. None of those buildings exist anymore in terms of that site. So they've all been cleared to make way for this new building. So when you look at the heritage component, you'll see very clearly that the Guinea Hostel came down. That was earthquake damaged. The Villa Maria got moved away, and then we started the interior work on the property, and it was totally gutted. So the Gutenwas study, all the places of learning in the building no longer exist. The accommodation that was in there no longer exists. The steel structure we put in there was designed to reinforce the 11 earlier structures that came up from Miani. So there were no pilings on that building, strange enough. They were just on bare earth. So by going into this and then putting down concrete floors, we've been able to significantly enhance the safety of the building. The top left picture really shows the rector's office, and that was gutted. And as a secondary, so we've had about 4 or 5 major renovations over the period of the last 24 years. And the top left was the rector's office. Now that's the Chanel room. It's actually got a name that we've put on the side of it. The top right-hand picture was the choir loft, and we used to keep a lot of equipment in an archive in there, and that's now become a passage and a corridor. Downstairs is the winter garden, which we've actually increased the size of the restaurant again. And then the bottom right-hand side was a completely new wing that we built on to balance the architecture. And we've loosely called the library room. So they've got designations where people can come and book a room. I put this picture in because the balustrade and the staircase that came out that went up to the language school is on the top pictures. It didn't replace the one on the bottom, but the one on the bottom was built into the restaurant to get us to the upstairs area. But it just highlights the amount of work that we had to do to preserve the exterior of the building, not the interior. And it's become the home of the winery, and I'll address that shortly because there is a strong cultural value here which we need to be mindful of. In 1998, we sat down and said, what are the things we need? We don't need deferred maintenance, we don't need crime and corruption, we don't need old buildings, and what we really want is a home for the winery and a place we can promote the wines. And with that in mind, we could then relatively inexpensively get office space. And I think it's important to note that the reason we didn't sell it in 1998 was the value was so bad and there was no apparent use for it. So in the hands of the owner and purposely redefining it around our wine business has created a big opportunity for an aesthetically pleasing building. I think that's the key thing because it is a remarkable building and the architect did an incredible job. But it is no longer referred to Mount St. Mary's, the seminary. It's called the Mission, and it's got a big brass logo on the porte cochere on the south side of the building that we rebuilt. So we reoriented the building from north to south. And so south entry, and it's now just simply referred to as the Mission. That area on the top right-hand side, we built that car park in about 2009-10 when we just couldn't cope with the amount of traffic up there. So again, further modification of that site. I took this picture and I'm sorry about the granular nature of it, but I was actually flying the plane at the time, trying to do two things at once wasn't that good. But it just shows you exactly the extent of the clearing of that site and how it's changed, and balancing it. And the two buildings on the top right-hand side of that picture are still there, but they will more than likely be demolished. They're surplus to requirement, and there is no value in them whatsoever. They are also non-compliant with standards now, so it comes back down to fire, earthquake, and so going back to where we were to start with, you can see that things are not much the same, and I'll put this up just as a cultural value around where we are. The society did not want the site anymore. They had relocated to Auckland. The Good Shepherd College had moved. It was affiliated to the Auckland University, and the seminary was relocated to Hopetown Street. So there was no need to have this site at all, and that was one of the reasons why they wanted to vacate and leave it. When I managed to persuade them about converting this into a winery stroke museum piece, they were very, very reluctant, and really for two reasons. One is the motto of the society is to be a part of, but also apart from, and they didn't feel that putting this on display was going to be of any use or benefit to the society. And then the second one was the promotion of the formation process was not a commercial proposition, and I had to assure them very carefully that this was really about wine. It is all about wine and wine sales, and the building that we built was intended to go onto the label, which it did. So it's actually like the old French chateau. You've got a house. Now, there are very, very few wineries in New Zealand that have a corporeal component to their wine labels, and the argument there is we probably have more interest in this building than anybody else as the owner, and also core to our branding proposition. So this plaque that went on the wall was around the society really rededicating this building, and a lot of the men have never come back. They've never, ever come back to that site. I think it was a hard place to train, and it wasn't easy. So, blessed by Father Alan Jones, we had a ceremony, and Dame Melvina Major came and performed for us. It was a wonderful evening, unforgettable. But it's no longer part of the society anymore. It's a commercial proposition, and it's run as a commercial enterprise. I've put a snap up here just to show you the restaurant. The restaurant in itself will get about 130 to 140,000 covers a year pre-booked, and then we get walk-ins as well. The cellar door would get the same sort of numbers. So it's very, very high profile. It's very well known, but it's very, very different to what the seminary used to be. And I've put a shot of the cellar door in there. This was almost shortly after we had opened it up. Now, the earlier shot I showed you with concrete floors, we took all of the flooring up and we stored it in the chapel, and then we put the concrete down, put the battens on, and then put the floors back on top. So we've tried to keep it as authentic as we can, but the actual building it's got H-beams, it's got air conditioning, it's got sprinkler systems, it's fire compliant, it's all of those things in the modern day that we need. And I'll also just point out that the yellow coloured walls are actually modern day jib with glass text put over it and then painted, and it gives you that old feel. So there's a lot of architectural and design elements in here that sort of try and keep the original feel, but actually underneath it's pretty much a new structure. And that's what it looks like today. And I think it's really important to note that the architectural survey we did when it was down at Miani was based on trying to recreate what we had in Miani. And so that H component, which is in Mr. Mackay's submission, had to be reconstructed. It was completely rebuilt to balance that building. And you'll notice as well is that there is total asymmetry about the building. So the wing on the right is bigger than the wing on the left. The roof down the middle has been split and opened up, and that's why it's got another roof on the apex to make the floor area wider. And none of the windows match. So we've kind of kept all that stuff in place, and the sashes are all quite different, and that's why it's a bit quirky. The fountain in the front comes out of Hamilton, and the one in the front comes out of a fountain factory, if you like, in Edinburgh. And it was a smaller fountain of the original one that was down in Miani. So we've tried to do these things to keep it as original as we can and to maintain that ambience. But you can see it's a very, very different place now. So that's my conclusion, and happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll see if we have any questions for you before we turn to Mr Mackay. Commissioner Taylor? No. Commissioner Brosnan?
Okay.
No, that's very informative. Thank you for that. Very interesting. Mr Mackay, anything you'd like to add at this stage?
Just happy to take questions, Mr Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioner Brosnan, any questions for Mr Mackay?
Thank you. I was just trying to reconcile. So we were at with the officer's recommendation, and that yours is to still remove the Legrand from list 20. That's correct, isn't it? Point 20 of the.
Yes, but offering the compromise position, acknowledging the cultural and spiritual heritage of the site, that an alternative notable place categorisation may be appropriate compared to the Category B, because obviously the Category B would result, or Group B, sorry, would result in resource consent requirements for any external alterations.
There's something else I think that we might want to add to this discussion, and that is, this is always about money, but it's not about money. And we've just gone through an insurance renewal process, and they've picked up the proposed classification in the district plan. The impact on us directly around functional reinstate or functional replacement versus reinstatement is a premium search on about $70,000 a year. So in 10 years, it's going to cost us $700,000 to insure this based on the single classification. So if we can redefine this, we will be in a better commercial position as well. And I come back to that comment to say that this building is probably more special to us than it is to the council. I don't say that in an arrogant way. It's really, you know, we spend a lot of time, money, effort, and it is home for us, and it's home for the winery. So we've probably got the high vested interest.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Mr Taylor? And Mr Mackay, I have no questions for you either, but just thank you very much for your evidence. It was very comprehensive and very clearly laid out, so nothing I need to clarify with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
All right, our next submitter is Sue Dick. So good morning and welcome. Just to repeat, anything that you've pre-circulated, including your original submission, we've read that, so you might be pleased to know you don't need to read that out loud to us, but you're very welcome to speak to that and highlight any key points you wish to make. And perhaps if you introduce yourselves and then present to us, we'll see if we have questions for you.
Mr Chairman, can I clarify that you're talking about the original submission?
Yes, the original.
Not the written statement we've provided.
Let me just check. So just to the staff, have we been pre-circulated any written statement? We have. Oh yeah, I see that now. So yes, we've received that as well, which we would have read that, but you don't need to read that out. But again, you're very welcome to highlight key points for us. So we have two documents, the original submission and your pre-circulated statement.
And just by way of clarification, the pre-circulation includes a 3-page written statement, a short PowerPoint which has our photos in it, which is on the screen, and 4 references.
Look, why don't you just take us through that material, and that would resolve any confusion in case we're talking about different documents. Just take us through what you wanted to present.
Thank you. First of all, I'll introduce ourselves. We're both submitters. I'm Susan Margaret Dick, and this is Howard Nicholson Pilgrim, Dr. Pilgrim, my husband. We've been the owners of number 1 Seaview Terrace for 16 years, since 2008, with our goal being improving our asset from a rundown condition to one that will survive into the future. After purchasing, I wrote a 40-page history of our home and its surroundings, particularly the streets it's on. We're here today supported by Ms. Leanne Cotter-Arledge and Mr. John Arledge, who own number 3 Seaview Terrace, and Ms. Donna Cullen from number 5 Seaview Terrace, who submitted opposing in reference 71, has texted me asking us to represent her. Our submission, reference 261, has been rejected by the council. None of the 7 owners have submitted in support of our listing, and we remain opposed to the PDP listing of our property without our consent. This first page here on our PowerPoint, I seek your discernment regarding my experience of 20 years as a heritage landscape architect. So I was advised by council staff that this may be relevant for this hearing, and I would seek your discernment in your own time about whether you would view me, myself, as having expertise beyond the layperson. So I list there my experience and qualifications.
Thank you.
The first section of our 3-page statement asks the question, who is the beneficiary when private homes are classified as Napier Heritage? Do the owners benefit from such a listing, or is it the people of Napier who benefit? So 1.1 covers the following key issues which we believe do not benefit us as the owners. First point is loss of privacy, public intrusion into the realm of private homes, tourist interest in the properties, which is very different from the Six Sisters, which you may observe on Marine Parade, which is a major tourist attraction occupied by businesses, not homeowners. The majority of our group are now owner-occupied. Second point we note is the potential increased insurance premiums, advised by a survey of 3 insurance companies noted in that reference 1. NZI and Vero have reported a minimum of 25% increase in insurance premiums and increased excesses. Third point, a likely lowered resale value in the order of 10 to 30%. We draw your attention to reference 2 and reference 3. What I would note there is that group listings aren't always specifically itemised. Fourth point, increased costs with resource consent required and not guaranteed. The next point is interesting because we have evidence that one of our heritage number 3, which has been modernised to building code standard, that such action leads to the increase of its capital value. So number 3, and you'll see a photo of this a bit later, is a 3-bedroomed home of similar size to ours. It was upgraded to the building code in 2019 and has a capital value last year of 1.450 thousand. Number 1, Seaview Terrace, our home, which is a 5-bedroom home, so 2 more rooms than number 3, has some improved heritage character with a capital value 400,000 less than number 3. This kind of upgrade is now not permitted without resource consent. We believe a heritage listing adversely restricts an owner, us, from exercising our right to future-proof or asset improve our home. So on balance to that, though that's the case for the owners finding little in the way of benefit, what do the people of Napier deserve to have this? Why do the people of Napier deserve to have this group protected? The assessment report states that this group of 7 houses forms one of the most striking townscape views in Napier. 4 of the 5 photographs, figures 43 to 46 in the report, are not views that can be seen on the ground. There are no present-day viewpoints illustrated in the report to confirm that it is a striking townscape. The reassessment report, Appendix C, etc., reiterates that this group has important townscape values, but no further evidence to back this opinion is given. So now, drawing on my landscape architecture experience, I would bring you to a number of images. What is our streetscape? There is no street along the boundary of the seaward side of the Seaview Group. I'm calling the 7 houses the Seaview Group, along which the public can walk. They cannot walk past our homes. Byron Street, the closest street, was closed upon the building of the Tipania Hotel. Is there a pointer that I can use?
You can use it as a pointer.
Can this be used as a pointer, that one? Okay. So I might just walk you through the streets here. Would that be helpful?
Sure.
Okay, so up the top here, whoops, it's a little bit, that's the Seaview Terrace Group up the top here. This is the Tipania Hotel here, wobbling around, and Marine Parade here in the yellow, and we're in here. So Byron Street is this street coming up here, which used to join through to Marine Parade before 2002 when the Tipania was built. And it was closed off. There's now no thoroughfare and no public access through Byron Street, other than going to the Community Arts Centre here. Herschel Street, which I will talk about shortly, this is Herschel Street coming down here, and the County Hotel, where we show a viewpoint, is, sorry, this isn't very sensitive, is this building here.
Yeah.
When the Tipania Hotel was commissioned, the council turned its back on views into this row of houses. So if you walk out here, before 2002, you would have seen the row of houses. The Tipania Hotel, supported by the Napier City Council, now blocks that view. And this is the view. And on the extreme right of this photo, you can see the little corner of a roof. Right near the edge here. Sorry, this pointer's there. That there.
Yep.
That's house number 7, number 6, Seaview Terrace. Arguably, this view was the most significant public view prior to the construction of the hotel, the most significant public view to this row of houses. Now, I'm just going to talk here about how widely the row of Seaview Terrace houses are to the CBD. So the yellow outline shows the group of houses. and the squiggly red Y there shows the visibility domain. Byron Street going into the back of the hotel accesses the rear of buildings. Once you enter the car park for the Community Arts Centre, the views are blocked by the building of the Community Arts Centre. So probably the most significant view is this one here. It's a very brief view if you're in your car, and this one's on the corner of Byron Street and Browning Street.
County Hotel.
It's outside the County Hotel. I estimate it's at a distance of 250 to 350 metres, and you'll notice that number 7 down the end virtually drops off the group. Sorry, number 6, the 7th house down the end virtually drops off the group. At this distance, I would invite you to consider whether you can tell which of these houses has double glazing and aluminium frames. Because one of the points we wish to make is that the modernisation of number 3, 1, 2, 3, this third of the 2-storey houses, is not perceptible to the public at this distance. Moving on to another quite enclosed view, this building on the right, sorry, it was just, you can just see the roof of it on the right here, is the Soldiers Club. So this is the sandwiched view because of the presence of the Te Pāngia Hotel. This is the only view from Marine Parade which remains to the group, and you can see that it's a very oblique view. It's not a prominent view. So in conclusion of that section, we would argue that with so few locations where the group of homes is visible, we pose the question as to whether many in Napier know about its existence or historic value. Now, Howard will speak to the maintenance issue, which is in our submission section 2.1.
Quite briefly, giving a house a historic heritage classification increases its costs. These buildings, these houses, with the original condition and the original materials, are in that already more expensive to maintain than a modern house. To require them to continue to continue to be maintained out of the original materials or something that looks like the original materials is an expensive exercise. So the classification imposes extra costs upon the owners. In addition to this, there are restrictions on what is permitted activity, so that there are a range of desirable increases, improvements to the home and maintenance to the home, necessary maintenance to the home, which now becomes subject to resource consent. So I'm just speaking briefly to what you can read in front of you.
Read those.
So while maintenance is a permitted activity, however, the broad range of home maintenance would require resource consent. Installation of double glazing existing wooden windows. We have now got double glazed wooden frame in 3 rooms in our house. A general, but we couldn't continue it to the further rooms. A general window upgrade to double glazed aluminium windows or doors, such as our neighbours in number 3 have done. Replacement of weatherboards for low maintenance cladding. Installation of solar panels on the roof, as encouraged in the local tsunami community meeting. Chimney removal for earthquake resilience, re-roofing the building. All of these would require resource consent. That is a considerable burden imposed upon the owners. We asked this question. These houses are nearly 140 years old. but how much longer can they be reasonably expected to live? Is the plausible economic future of these buildings likely to be conversion to building code quality such as number 3 have done? A younger generation, we would submit, will want to do that, seeking readaptive use of these to a modern standard, or installing solar panels, or installing windows and aluminium windows as number 3 have done. And we submit that these should be done as of right and not seen as detracting to the group. And the owners deserve to be assisted to complete such work by removing the heritage listing from the plan, which would prevent future-proofing them as of right. So that's regarding to maintenance, increased maintenance costs. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, because I just draw your attention now to the photo of the 3 two-storey homes. This is, as you walk along Marine Parade, it's a short piece of the street where you see these 3 only, you do not see the group. Looking at these 3, I'd just like to run through some of the modifications that have been made. So non-authentic veranda treatments on 2 and 3, probably resulting from damage in the 1931 earthquake. Non-authentic enclosing of the veranda in number 1, with a non-authentic double-glazed window, which isn't in character. Number 3, can you guess, is this the one that has modern aluminium double-glazed windows throughout? Yes, it is. Does it matter? Can you tell? We wanted to draw the submission that we would like to make, which is that requiring resource consent for the dramatic rebuild that number 3 did has not adversely affected its form, its roof form, its pattern and rhythm of openings, 3 above, 3 below, some kind of veranda along the front, that we would argue that these asset improvements are appropriate.
So we're really saying, in addition to what Sue's just said, that owners left to their own resources, if they own one of these buildings, they're liable to, they value them for what they are, and they will restore them, they would tend to want to restore and keep features that are characteristics of these houses, rather than gutting them, making them something quite different. So, and that it doesn't require regulation from the council to ensure that it happens. Owners will tend to do that because that will enhance the value of the properties and the use of the properties for the owners themselves. So I'm just moving on to the next one. The value of the property. Just want to draw your, this next section is just drawing your attention to a study that has been done of Auckland heritage property, Auckland City Council, a large area that have both special character areas and heritage designations. So this was an empirical study on property values. I assume some members of the committee may be already aware of this, but we've included the study as a PDF. It's beyond my pay grade. I can understand some of the mathematics. It's statistical, but the point they make is that 2 things happen when these sort of classifications were applied to homes in the Auckland area. One is that if you create a special character area, that provides protection for all houses. I don't know what range that is, or whether it will include a group of 6 houses, such as we have here. It provides some characters because they won't be so intensively developed, which is likely to happen in Auckland. On the other hand, as soon as you put a heritage designation on it, you can decrease its value, its perceived market value, and this is in terms of sale prices, and they've done the studies over actual sales where all other factors are controlled for, you increase it by up to nearly 10%. So this is taking value from us as owners and transferring it into the public area. It's claiming partial value for these homes which were designed privately, developed privately, have been maintained by a succession of owners and improved in many cases privately, and it's taking that value and saying that now part of that now belongs to the public. And it's not only claiming it without cost to the owners, it's claiming it at the risk of a market value that in Auckland could be up to 10%. So I just submit that as an empirical evidence for the cost of heritage designation, and a major reason why we, naturally, don't want the heritage designation to be imposed upon these houses. Hand it back to Sue.
And just to add an addendum to that, we are already within the Napier Hill Character Zone. Moving on to Section 4, there are 3 pieces of new information since our submission, and we seek leave to talk to those. The first involved a phone call that I had with Fleur Lincoln about 10 days ago, in which I was discussing the disappointing process, including for the Napier City Council on the left of the table, including the invasion of our privacy with the research on the group being done without our knowledge. I should add that both Elizabeth Plashif and Anne Galloway are colleagues and friends of mine, and so to end up discovering that they had been secretly doing this assessment without our knowledge was reasonably upsetting at the time. The lack of collaboration, and also, as we're going to argue in relation to the Hastings district, the lack of our permission. So Fleur advised me that the Hastings District Council, 1 or 2 years after the Napier process, had taken a different approach, which was, the link that I provide there in the middle is the link to the request to the public of Hastings for nominations of appropriate heritage buildings that might be considered in their assessment process. And the decision that the Hastings District Council made was not to list private homes as heritage items without the written consent of owners. So I was quite troubled 10 days ago when I learnt of this. Fleur did explain to me that the planners had then gone back to the Napier City Council seeking a similar process by the council, but that was declined. So in the light of this finding, highlighting new information, we seek voluntary agreement for our group heritage listing in the Napier PDP. Second new piece of information is the reassessment report, Appendix C, etc. Claims that this group of houses is nationally significant, but there is not much supporting evidence for this. There are no significant architects named in relation to the design of our group, nor are there any nationally significant residents who have lived here. You know, we're not talking Janet Frame or Helen Clark. It's hardly notable that the architect Finch designed a retaining wall or the interior of 5 Seaview Terrace. So in a report classifying nationally significant heritage adopted by the Napier City Council, we wish to record some national trends. Reference 4 highlights the wide variety of outcomes in the way councils approach owner consent for heritage home listings. This is a 2022 report. The current Napier City Council process is taking place within a legislative framework that is flawed by its lack of clarity and liable to be reviewed. Reference 4 is a really interesting letter. Reference 4 refers to the Heritage Policy report. Reference 1 is a very interesting letter dated April this year to the current Minister for RMA Reform, asking for an amendment to the effect that a property may only be added to a council's district plan as heritage designated with the express written consent of the property owner. And there's some national history relating to the Hutt City Council when they were presented with this survey. I think 2/3 of the properties were withdrawn from their proposed district plan. The last item, which is new and was only learnt about by reading the Section 42A report, are deliberations for number 2 Milton Road, submission number 185. Surprisingly, it's led to a whole new heritage category called Historic Place Identification Only. The proposed nature of this category is spelt out at length in the Section 42A report, pages 18, 19 and 20. And given that one of our row properties, number 3, has been sensitively modernised to building code standards, and others have a range of inauthentic elements on the seaward facade, we find the Section 32AA analysis particularly pertinent to our group. So the intention of this is to record an historical matter, but to not impose restrictions on what may be done to that property. So reading C, it will enable owners subject to this new classification to continue to use and enjoy their building structures with modern uses and requirements. And we ask that this new category be one of the considerations for a classification for our Seaview Terrace group. Last section, our outcome sought. In our submission, we sought withdrawal of the Seaview Group from the proposed heritage listing, Schedule 3, number 198. Today, this is still our wish, based on the following summary. The disappointing process for this heritage project, resulting in an invasion of our owner privacy, with a heritage listing in the PDP that did not gain our written consent. Secondly, the increased insurance, maintenance, and future-proofing costs borne by the owners. C, the probable effects on house value, where we have given evidence that this would lead to loss of future property value. D, our perception that this heritage project constitutes a partial seizure of private property as a public good without any public investment in either its original development, subsequent preservation, or future maintenance. We would ask the committee to discern, please, whether the Seaview Group reaches the threshold for a heritage group of national significance and whether it is significant in visual and historic terms to the Napier community. A couple of other considerations. One, if the committee is of a mind to recommend the retention of the Seaview Group for inclusion in the PDP, then we seek amendment to the rules as follows. Removal of the restricted discretionary status of Rule HH-R5 governing external alterations and/or additions to any Group B heritage item, amending it to become a permitted activity. This would leave building relocation, HH-R7, and demolition, HH-R8 rules as the only discretionary rules. We're of the view that these rules are the most important rules for the protection of the reciprocal interest each owner holds in the group. We become responsible to each other. But we're only suggesting that our preference is to have the heritage classification withdrawn. And probably if I added in a 2 there, I would bring the last request. We ask that the category historic place identification only be considered as a classification for the Seaview Terrace group.
Thank you very much for that. That was extremely comprehensive and helpful. I'll see if we have any questions for you, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm aware you've been here for part of this morning, and so just in relation to your last comment about the other category of historic place, did you hear the conversations around alternative terminology like notable place?
I only got in on the end of that, I'm sorry, notable. I think the key question is what the rules are if it's considered to be notable. The rules are the ones that either permit us or bind us, and we're feeling very, very challenged. I need to say personally by this. We're passionate about heritage. If we can be called notable without the rules, we would be happy with that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brosnan.
Thank you, Sue, for your presentation and all the support that you have. I think, yeah, I've written a few notes which I intended to put into clear questions, so please bear with me. Yeah, I think it's understandable, that desire to remove the regulation and the cost. You obviously have a clear heritage knowledge, expertise and passion, and you clearly value the heritage in your home, as you mentioned the report that you wrote when you took it over. You see there to be no private benefit, but some public benefit, limited. You acknowledge that there's been some heritage value that's been lost in part through modifications of the grouping. And considering that you obviously see heritage value in your property, I guess I'm interested, I see a little bit of conflicting, positions when I was listening to you both speak. Is that sort of professional view that protecting the facade or the exterior of a privately owned item of heritage is not in the community benefit to a great extent. But then we also spoke about in your submission that no need for resource consent, and however that property number 1, you spoke around a lot of the loss of and non-authentic modifications that have been made to that. And so I guess I was sort of trying to formulate something around, do you think if number 1 had required a resource consent?
Number three.
Number 3.
Sorry. I was thinking number 1.
Number 1 is on the left of this
Far
photo,
left.
and that is our property.
Far left, is it? The one with the most inauthentic modifications you spoke of.
Is the blue-grey one on the right,
Sorry, 3.
and to which the owners would say there is no heritage left. And the
Interesting.
owners are sitting back here.
Got you.
We-
And so I think my question is do you think if resource consent had been required for those modifications that you spoke of as being non-authentic, that loss of heritage value could have been mitigated? Because we acknowledge there's value in it.
Well, I think that's a question for a planner, really.
We can answer that as our house. The reality is it was a 2-storey property that had been converted into 2 flats. It was completely run down, and it was at the point where we said to ourselves, do we turn it back into one house, or do we just let it go? Now, it cost us over $500,000 to turn that back into, and we had to go through all the resource consents to do that. with consent, and to get it up to standard, because as soon as we wanted to change, those aren't double windows anymore, they're all little French doors. And so to do that, all of a sudden we had to come up to new build spec, and so we did that. So it contains a matter of, when you look at all three houses in a group like that, it does at a glimpse, it's like as you pass, you get the feeling that it's still a grand old house, but the reality is, but to answer your question, no, if we had to have gone through any more hoops than what we did to do what we did,
we would have demolished.
We would have just either on sold or gone on, yeah. Because the reality is we live there because of the proximity to CBD and the magnificent views. And we do have a little bit of a penchant for the fact that it is a beautiful old house. But it's a stunningly good house now that it's up to modern standards. So I agree with modern standards. But when that was built, it was built almost on the ground. We had to dig the ground down and lift the house up to come up to standards. There's a lot of stuff we did to make it still there today.
Yep. Thank you. I think through you, Mr. Chair, the point and the rule, I guess, that I would like to make is there was a comment that owners will, I think you, sir, made the comment, tend to protect the heritage and keep it authentic as it is in their interest. And that seems in conflict as well to what was presented. So my question to you is, isn't heritage resource consent rules the mechanism in which we do what you've said, protect and keep it authentic?
Could you point us to where we're saying protect heritage?
So I made a note of the gentleman when he was speaking. He said, owners will tend to protect the heritage value and keep it authentic as it is in their interest. Just in your submission.
May I clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Each of these houses, the three houses that are in view now, each of them have been modified to some extent. There is inauthentic, unoriginal features about them. Your eye, when we were talking about number 3, your eye was drawn to number 1, our house. I could probably guess what you looked at when you thought that was something inauthentic. It's probably the kitchen window, which happened in the 1930s. A succession of owners will improve the house within the general framework, left to their own devices, within the general framework of the general character of the house. That's why they bought the house in the first place, that they liked the general character.
Thank you, Mr.
How a planner might define what is a desirable improvement is an encumbrance, and 2, might not have led to these sort of outcomes at all, and might have been more heterogeneous than they currently are.
I think it's really important that we reply and answer your question, and I'm not sure that we have. Because if we come back to our building, we bought the property because we like its character. We've bought a property that had a lot of changes already made to it, some poor. We find it insulting that the planners think that they can do better than we have done. We have made the best use of the enclosed veranda, which is not authentic. It's our kitchen. We work with the material we've got. In some instances, we can be mindful of keeping character. In some instances, putting a double glazed window in there. We've we've matched our needs as being more important for a warm double glazed kitchen dining room. So what we're saying is, why would we need a resource consent to do that? We're opposed to the need for a resource consent to manage and take our property, these properties, into the future to a standard that the next generation will seek. We pointed out that number 3 is now 400,000 more valuable than number 1. And if you look at it, can you tell that it's got double glazing?
That it's modernised.
That it's modernised. Has it detracted? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, look, I think so. I've just, any other questions? Did you like that?
No, I'm happy. I've got a good.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about your concern about the need for a resource consent, and just to better understand that. Is that due to the cost of the process?
Delays and costs and no guarantees.
So cost, delays and no guarantees of a positive outcome from your perspective in terms of consent being granted, is that?
And obviously, I guess, could I give an example of one of the more concerning potential scenarios that could arise?
Yeah.
And this was pointed out in another reference, which we haven't given you. But if, for example, an earthquake hits and the verandas all fall off the fronts of these buildings, now, the Napier City Council could require those to be rebuilt. We restored the Swallowtail roof to our veranda. We weren't required to, but we chose to restore that beautiful Swallowtail roof. Would the council require us to rebuild each of those 3 verandas to a heritage standard? Our insurance company will not cover us for heritage. When we look at our insurance policy, it tells us that none of the heritage elements inside will be replaced, nor in particular some of the external heritage features. So that some of the detailed fretwork along our veranda, detailed dados and brackets, etc., which might well get lost in an earthquake, are not covered for replacement. So a battle could ensue where the Hastings District Council requires us to rebuild to a heritage standard, and where our insurance will not cover us.
Yep. All right, look, I think we've had a very fulsome presentation, and we thank you for that. I'm pretty sure we have a good understanding of your concerns, and you've presented the relief that you'd like us to consider, and you've given us 3 options in that regard. So I can assure you that we will take all your concerns on board and give it some pretty serious consideration. So thank you very much for coming in this morning.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for
Chair.
hearing us.
Next submitter is Christine Briasco. So the Vigor Brown Group instead. Yep, Vigor Brown Group, if you'd like to come up because Ms. Briasco is moving her car. Morning.
Good morning.
Actually, it's good afternoon now. Good afternoon. So just let me get your information up. All right, so I think you've made the original submission and you've also pre-circulated some written evidence, is that correct?
Well, not evidence as such, but another submission.
Yes, sure.
Yes.
All right, so anything that's been pre-circulated prior to today we've read, so you don't need to read that out, but you're very welcome to speak to that and highlight key points for us.
Right, well, I will just highlight some of the main points in our
That'd be great.
submissions.
Thank you.
So I appear for the Vigor Brown Group, which consists of 36 households in Napier South, and the members of the group are listed in attachment 1 to our written submissions. Most of us live in the northwest end of Vigor Brown Street, and the others live in McDonald Street, Winifred Street, and Kennedy Road. So our submissions today will be on 2 matters. First, the extent of the Napier South Heritage Overlay, and in particular, how much of Vigor Brown Street should be included. And second, on the fencing restrictions in the Napier South Heritage Overlay. Dealing with the first point first, the extent of the Napier South Heritage Overlay. We submit that there should be a heritage overlay over the northwest end of Vigor Brown Street, and this is shown in attachment 2 of our written submissions. This covers the area between Carnell Street and Kennedy Road, and also some properties on the other side of Kennedy Road. And I'll call that area the Vigor Brown area. Now, we submit this is a unique part of Napier's pre-earthquake history. After the 1897 flood, the city used silt from the Tutaikeri River to reclaim large areas of swamp. The first sections went on the market in 1908, and by 1930, Napier South was largely built. The majority of housing is single-storey villas and bungalows. Most of the areas in Napier of this period have been affected significantly by modern developments. However, in our part of Vigor Brown Street and McDonald Street, the character of this era in Napier's history has largely been preserved as a haven against modernity. The residents of this area have maintained its character for over 100 years because it has been, and continues to be, extremely important to us. Like our predecessors, we have chosen to live in and around this area because of its character. We value the original villas and bungalows, their native timbers, their warm and intimate charm, their human scale. We accept that the cost of maintenance is higher than for more modern houses, but it is well worth it. We feel we are part of Napier's living heritage. Now, the proposed district plan only gives part of McDonald Street a heritage overlay, the part between Carnell Street and Kennedy Road. Vigor Brown Street was excluded entirely, despite having the same heritage value. And here we refer to the report by Mr. Graham Linwood, produced in December 2019. Now, the Section 42A report by the Council's Principal Planner recommends that the heritage overlay be extended to part of Vigor Brown Street, and this is based on the report and evidence of Dr. Pashif and Ms. Galloway. However, we submit that this does not go far enough. The Section 42A report excludes 12 to 20 Vigor Brown Street, which is near Carnell Street, and 82 and 84 Kennedy Road, and 43 to 51 Vigor Brown Street, which are on the other side of Kennedy Road. We note that there's no explanation or justification for excluding these areas in the Section 42A report. We submit that these areas should be included in the heritage overlay because they have substantially the same heritage character as the area recommended in the Section 42A report, and also in the McDonald Street area that has already been has already been covered by a heritage overlay in the proposed district plan. And we again refer to the Linwood report, and I've summarised that in paragraph 11 of our written submissions, which shows how Mr. Linwood characterised each property as being primary, contributory, etc. We accept that 20 Vigor Brown Street should be non-contributory because the house on that property has recently been demolished. But in summary, therefore, we submit that the whole of the Vigor Brown area, which is shown in Annexure 2 of our written submission, should be part of the Napier South Heritage Overlay, with numbers 20 and 21, Vigor Brown Street, as non-contributory. Would the panel wish to raise any points or ask any questions about that aspect, or should I move on to the fencing restrictions?
I think maybe if you deal with the fencing, and then we'll take questions collectively, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Now, in the draft district plan, there are differences between the proposed fencing restrictions for the general residential zone and for the Napier South Historic Overlay. In particular, in relation to the front yard fence, in the Heritage Overlay, the front fence is limited to 1.2 metres in height, and that's in OVR 5 S4, whereas in the general residential zone, the front fence may be up to 1.8 metres in height, with other specified restrictions, and that's in GRZ S8. Now, we submitted originally that the fencing restrictions for the Napier South Historic Overlay, which we submit should include the Vigor Brown area, should be the same as the fencing restrictions for the general residential zone, whatever they happen to be, in the final district plan. This was rejected in the Section 42A report. We submit that there is no justification for restricting front fencing to 1.2 metres in the heritage overlay. That's because height per se is not indicative of heritage character. A 1.2 metre fence is not inherently of heritage character, and conversely, a fence that is above 1.2 metres is not inherently lacking in heritage character. What is of greater significance are the overall design and materials for the fence. So you'll see in page 6 of our submissions examples of two different types of fence. The fence in photo 1 is 1.2 metres high and would meet the heritage overlay rule, but clearly is not of heritage character. Whereas photo 2 shows a fence which is 1.5 metres high and would not meet the heritage overlay rule, but does fit in within the character of the Vigor Brown area. So the overall design and appearance are determinative, mere height is not. By and large, residents have erected fences that do not clash with the area's overall character. However, this is balanced against the modern need for privacy and security, which is a much higher priority now than it was 100 years ago, when there was significantly less crime. And also dog control is a factor. We submit that there is no need to impose a more restrictive height rule, which will not of itself substantially affect heritage character, and therefore the fencing restrictions in the heritage overlay should be the same as the fencing restrictions for the general residential zone. Now, before I finish, I noted that the panel asked the council officials some questions about natural justice and extending the Napier South Heritage Overlay. Would the panel be assisted if I made some submissions on that point, or is that not necessary?
Why don't you say what you want to say, and we'll decide what weight we give to it when we do our deliberations.
I think the question is whether individual property owners should be notified and consulted with before a heritage overlay is applied to their area. The first point I'd make is that the natural justice requirements vary according to the nature of the procedure and the substance of the procedure. And here, this procedure is governed by the Resource Management Act, which has set out the procedural requirements in Schedule 1 of the Act. So, for example, Clause 5 provides for public notification, and significantly, the Schedule 1 only requires notification to individual property owners in certain cases, including where a designation or a heritage order is being proposed. It does not say that individual notification or consultation is required for a heritage overlay. So the public notice requirements were met by the council. Then there are provisions for submissions to be made, which have been provided for, and for further submissions, and for public access to all of those documents. And then there is a hearing where submitters can be heard. So those I submit are the natural justice requirements for this kind of procedure. No individual notification or consultation is required for a heritage overlay. If it were, it would be included in the schedule. That's the first point. The second point is this. If there were a natural justice issue for applying a heritage overlay, then there would be a natural justice issue for many matters in the district plan, which would require similar individual notification and consultation. One example is the imposition of high-density zones or medium-density zones, which in my submission are even more significant than heritage overlay. If somebody built 6-storey apartments around my house, I would leave. But if they put a heritage overlay, I'd be very happy. So it would mean that all individual property owners who are affected by a high-density zone or a medium-density zone would need to be notified and given an opportunity for consultation. And in my submission, that would simply be impractical, inefficient, and delay the procedure unnecessarily. Further, if that were required, it would mean that when residents change, new residents would have to be notified and consulted during the course of this process. Now, this is taking probably close to 2 years. So all the new residents who are affected by the proposed district plan, such as a heritage overlay or a high-density zone, they would need to be consulted, and then they would have to have an opportunity to make submissions, and they would have to have an opportunity to be heard at a hearing. So would the hearing be reopened for new residents? Well, I submit that simply isn't practicable, and why it's not included in the schedule of the RMA Act. So those are my submissions on the natural justice point.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting. I think in terms of new residents, the criteria of caveat emptor would apply, wouldn't it? If there's already a heritage overlay, they'd purchase their property in knowledge of that.
I'm talking about in the process before, when the period between the draft district plan being issued, which was last year, and
I see.
The process of 2 years before some decision is made,
So the intervening
residents
period.
come and go.
Sure.
So a new resident's going to have to be notified.
I understand the point. Yep. Now, Fleur, you mentioned at the start that you had reconsidered your recommendations on fencing in this, for this area. Is that correct? Do you want to just
That is
explain
correct.
to the hearing what your current thoughts are?
Sure. I have consulted with my heritage experts. I wonder whether it would be useful for them to explain their advice that they provided to me, or would you like me to cover that off myself?
I think you cover it off, and if we need any
Okay.
clarification, we can ask for that.
Sure. Okay. So some options that we can put forward and consider is having solid fences up to a height of 600 millimetres with 50% visual permeability, or alternatively, and that visual permeability be consisting of vertical elements up to 1.2 metres. Correct. So metal bars with 80% permeability up to 1.8 metres as provided by the image shown by the submitter. And that we would need to avoid materials such as horizontal boards or sheet materials, solid fences up to 1.2 metres, and wide boards, for example, 90 millimetres and above. Oh, yes, the traditional fence palings in the area are typically 70 millimetres in diameter.
So thank you for that.
So more specificity
So what rule would
around
that
materials.
affect? What rule would that affect?
There's a standard.
Standard?
Sorry, let me just find that.
Is it OVR 5S4? Is it?
That sounds about right. Right. Fences. Correct. OVR 5S4.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that. So Ms. Chan, any response to that? I know it's a little bit hard to put you on the
It's a
spot.
bit hard in getting all measurements in my head.
Well, how about this? How about ask the officers to provide you what's just been said in writing,
Yes,
and
that
then
would-
we'll give you leave to come back with any further thoughts you have on that?
Thank you. Then I can work through with the group.
Yes, exactly. All right.
And would I respond in writing
I think if you just respond by way of email to our hearings administrator, that would be sufficient.
Thank
Don't
you.
need to make it overly formal.
Thank
And maybe within the next week, week and a half.
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, so thank you for that, Fleur, and for the advice you've received from your technical experts. Understand the rationale there. So we'll see if there are any questions. Commissioner Brosnan, any questions for the submitter?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I did just have something I was going to seek your comment on, but it might be considering the changes that we've just heard is in your submission you talked about the opposition to the fence height in relation to how appropriate that fence height isn't reflective of heritage value. And I was just going to ask you to consider that fence height may have some value in regards to the visual impact of being able to see the heritage item itself, being the dwelling,
Yes.
and to consider that. But I think considering the response we have from staff, maybe that can just form part of your discussion with your group, and if you had any additional thoughts.
Thank you. I'll come back with the groups for you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No,
No?
thank you.
No. And look, I have no questions of clarification for you. You've given us a very detailed and informed submission and spoke to that this morning, so nothing I need to clarify. I understand the issues you brought to our attention, so thank you.
Thank you.
Now, last submitter for the morning is Christine Briasco.
Tēnā koutou, katoa. I haven't done this before, so please excuse me. Okay, I'm just going to read what I've got here, just to support my written submission. I've lived in Napier South a lot of my life, and I now live at the McLean Park end of McDonald Street. I really love my suburb and was excited to learn that the City Council plan to designate parts of the city as areas of historic heritage. So I was disappointed to learn that in the end, the designation was one small block of Napier South. I'm reminded of a visit to Christchurch Museum as a child. The museum had a colonial era street of facades that you could walk through and look at the windows and the way people worked and lived. Artificial, nothing substantial, a mirage really. The idea of having a single block of McDonald Street and as Napier South's historic heritage overlay reminded me of that museum street. A tiny showpiece with nothing behind. So I'm somewhat happier to learn, but only a little bit, that the adjacent Vigor Brown Street block has been included in the overlay. The Napier City Council proposed district plan states the purpose of identifying historic heritage is to protect it from inappropriate subdivision use and development. And I just want to say I support all of Mr. Chan's submission. I strongly believe that the Napier South Historic Heritage Overlay should include at least McDonald Street and Vigor Brown Street, bounded by the eastern side of Carnell Street and Latham Street, and the south, sorry, the other, and Latham Street, and Nelson Crescent from Latham Street to Kennedy Road. I agree with the City Council's statement that Napier's natural, cultural and built heritage is part of our day-to-day lives, and I applaud the Council's desire to add to the great work done for the heritage of our city and to enable people and stories to be celebrated into the future. And we need to ensure that these buildings, that we are building a strong legacy for the future. I also agree with the Council's decisions that council decisions should be made with a focus on the impression of the city leaves for visitors and the people who live here. We need to promote the uniqueness of Napier in relation to its development and heritage. Graham Linwood's review in 2019 of Napier heritage character areas observes that Napier's history of development is inextricably linked to the land availability over time. It is unique in that large areas of the city have coherent character as successive waves of reclamation and the earthquake provided additional land for development. Napier contains concentrations of areas displaying recognisable characteristics that are of their time, and I do think in New Zealand we are unique, pretty unique. The first of these areas was Napier South. The review identified Napier South as having significant heritage character. And Linwood noted that despite the popularity of the suburb, there's been little modern development and the majority of old houses remain unmolested. It is clear that one of the reasons people live in this suburb is because of the character that exists, and the majority of homes have been well cared for or have been restored. The review identified the streets containing the highest preservation of character elements as the ones that I have mentioned earlier. The review found that there was little significant difference in the heritage character between these areas. A small block of McDonald Street was singled out because it had very marginally more character features, and this is the block chosen for the overlay. From my perspective, as well as being a pleasant place to live, the whole of Napier South has significant heritage value, and so close to CBD has the potential to add even more tourist and living opportunities. Napier South has significantly contributed to Napier being a very attractive city. This could be very much more enhanced by extending the overlay from one small section of one street, plus one now, to include all of the area identified in the review. I need to add that enabling high and medium density zone development into the suburb would very significantly negatively impact on existing character and the heritage aesthetic of the area. Although any rezoning is likely to impact in my lifetime, I would argue that it will drive those who care about the character of the suburb away, thereby reducing the potential for maintenance of this heritage value. I believe that most people are attracted to purchase properties in Napier South because of its heritage character. If the whole of Napier South cannot be designated historic heritage character area, then I would like to see Napier South historic heritage overlay expanded to include McDonald Street and Vigor Brown Street, bounded by Carnell Street and Latham Street, and Nelson Crescent from Latham Street to Kennedy Road, and to maintain these as general residential zones. The proposed district plan states once lost, historic heritage and its associated values cannot be recreated. Please, I urge you to reconsider the very limited and short-sighted Napier South overlay to include at least the additional areas identified in the historic review. Don't let the now destroy the forever. I'm making the...
Thank you very much. Would you be able to provide, could you email, did you type that document out that you were reading from?
Yeah, this morning.
Would you be able to email that to our hearing administrator so we can have a copy of it?
Yeah.
That'd be great, thanks. I'll see if we have any questions. Commissioner Taylor? No? Commissioner Brosnan?
No.
Can I just quickly say, I just want to support what Robin Gwynn said earlier as an aside about communication with the community, while I've got the chance here to talk to you. Just about, I mean, I think I try to pay attention to what's going on in Napier, but really I often have no idea because communication channels are just not there. And I do get the have your say stuff that comes, but it lacks detail and substance. I think if I can just say, it's nothing to do with this, but to get more people engaged, it would be good to have some other way of communicating with the general public because there's so little citizen engagement in this proposed district plan.
Yeah, thank you for that. You're quite correct. That's nothing to do with our process. Our
I
job
know, I
is to look at
realise, but I thought I
amendments
have
to
an
the district
opportunity to
plan.
say
Hang on
it.
a minute. And so I'm not going to ask the two councillor commissioners to respond to that because they're wearing different hats today. They're wearing hearing panel member hats, but I'm sure they've listened to what you said regardless.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So and that's the end of the presentations this morning. We're now going to adjourn for lunch and we're running a little bit behind schedule, so we'll reconvene at 1:45. And if staff could just let the submitters know that this afternoon we're reconvening a quarter of an hour later than as scheduled.